Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeats.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from the from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, T-H-O-M, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Chenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The hole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction, the disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing
society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shin.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Boy, what a day it is what was the old saying from the Firesign Theater? It's hotter than heater in Hooker and hotter than Hooker in Hellville. It is hot out there all over the planet. And so I wanted to check in with Professor Michael Mann on this. He's the Distinguished Professor of Meteorology and the Director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State University, author of multiple books. The guy who invented the, he's the author of The Madhouse Effect, How Climate Change Denial is Threatening Our Planet, Destroying Our Politics, and Driving Us Crazy. His website, michaelmann.net, and you can tweet him at Michael E. Mann with 2 N's. And Michael, you invented the hockey stick?
You could say that, yeah.
Okay.
20 years ago now.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Al Gore took that thing and popularized it. And boy, your work, you have changed the world, sir. Your work is just extraordinary. I'm
right back at you, Tom. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm looking at an article in Nature. I'm wondering if you saw this. Globally rising soil heterotropic respiration over recent decades, and what they started out by saying global soils store at least twice as much carbon as the Earth's atmosphere. And then they talk about how it's traditionally been a global sink of carbon. And now they say it looks like it's starting to gas out carbon, that this could be a tipping point of some considerable danger. They say all trends are robust to sampling variability in ecosystem type, disturbance methodology, fertilization effects, and mean climate. Taken together, our findings provide observational evidence that global RH is rising, probably in response to environmental changes, consistent with meta-analysis, long-term experiments. And they say that some of this is being driven by increased bacterial activity in soil. We've been talking about this for a long time, you and me, Michael. And back, 5, 6, 8 years ago, I would say wild stuff like, oh my God, what happens if the methane starts melting in the Arctic, or the soil starts outgassing methane. And you were a little more laid back. It seems that scientists, and I don't mean that in any negative way. I honor your methodical approach to all this stuff, but it seems that science is starting to get scary. Am I exaggerating here?
No, not at all. And our critics accuse us sometimes, the scientists, of being alarmists because of the what we have to say, because of the problem that we're describing. And you could say that what we have to say is alarming. And the irony here is, if anything, we have been overly reticent. That includes myself at times. We tend to be conservative in terms of our pronouncements because we want to be convinced by the evidence before we state something to be true. Now, on methane feedbacks, there still is a legitimate debate within the climate research community as to how substantial those might be. But this latest article that you describe is a good example of one of these, unknowns, known unknowns, if you will, and an example of how uncertainty has not been our friend, because we are, in fact, learning that there may be some additional positive feedback processes. And that sounds like a good thing, but it's not. The positive feedback is a vicious cycle. It means the problem worsens itself. And in this case, by warming the planet and warming the soils, we're increasing the activity, this bacterial activity, in a way that actually causes the soils from being, as you alluded to, a net sink that's pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere and helping keep CO2 levels lower than they would otherwise be. That appears to be turning into a source. It's actually adding to the CO2 buildup from the burning of fossil fuels. There are other examples of these so-called carbon cycle feedbacks that typically have not been incorporated into climate models. Only in more recent years have climate modelers started to incorporate these processes. And this is an example of why it's been so difficult. We're still doing the basic research necessary to understand these mechanisms so that we can put them in a mechanistic model. Yeah. And here is an example of a study that may cause modelers to reconsider whether we are properly accounting for microbial activity in these models we use to examine the effect of increasing greenhouse gas concentrations on our climate. Yeah. So this is an example of an unwelcome surprise, another example of how things in some sense might be worse than we had thought, not better.
Yeah. The two things I wanted to get your take on right off the top here are, for some time I've been running around yelling about, the Permian mass extinction, a mass die-off. I'm getting a little less hysterical about that and a lot more concerned about civilizational impacts over the short term. What happens when we have millions, billions of climate refugees? We had August 1st, yesterday was Earth Overshoot Day. It was the day that we surpassed the ability of the planet to produce, to maintain, to sustain itself, essentially, with the net primary productivity. What are your thoughts on the possibility of climate change being a civilizationally disruptive event? That's my first question. The second one, lest I forget, is it the case that these weather events are obviously the heat is hotter and the storms are stronger and all that kind of stuff, but that the main reason that they're perceived as being even more severe than the increased temperature might suggest, and they're causing things like all these wildfires, is because the jet stream has disintegrated in ways that are causing these weather patterns to move much more slowly than they traditionally used to be. So instead of just one day of 103, we're getting 6 days in a row of 103. Back to you, sir.
Yeah, I'll try to tackle both of those questions at once because they are interrelated. The fact is that you don't have to use your imagination anymore to understand how climate change represents a threat to civilization. All you have to do is turn on your television or read your newspaper headlines. We are seeing all sorts of extremely unprecedented and damaging weather events across the entire northern hemisphere right now, from the wildfires in California to the unprecedented heat in the Arctic and the wildfires up there, to the flooding in Japan, and the list goes on. And these are all interconnected in a way that you've alluded to. Some of this it has to do with basic physics. You warm up the planet, you're going to have more intense and more frequent heat extremes. That's obvious. You warm up the planet, you're going to have a warmer atmosphere that can hold more moisture, so you're going to get bigger rainfall events. You're going to get bigger flooding events. You dry out the soils through evaporation, you're going to get worse droughts as well at the same time, and the list goes on. But there's something else going on here as well, and you've alluded to this. Part of what makes these weather events so extreme isn't just the nature of the weather itself, but its persistence. And we are seeing the jet stream, in a sense, slowing down. And we're also seeing very large meanders in the jet stream where it swings way north. And that gives us what's known as a ridge. And that's where you get a lot of sunlight. You get baking of the soils. You get drought. You get wildfires. And that's what we've got over Western North America right now, California. But then that jet stream meander dips south again on the other side of the country. That's what we call a trough. It's a low pressure center. And you get rainfall with that. Well, we've had rain here for, I think, now 7 consecutive days here in central Pennsylvania. And it's part of this large-scale system right now, this large-scale sort of meander in the jet stream that isn't moving along. And it's a really big meander. So the bigger those ridges, the bigger those troughs, the more wiggly the jet stream, the more extreme weather. The slower the jet stream, the more likely it is that those weather systems remain stalled. They stay in place. And day after day, you get rainfall in the same location, or the heating of the sun day after day in the same location. Our own research has shown that climate change, and in part through the accelerated warming of the Arctic, is actually changing the jet stream in a way that makes these properties more frequent, that makes it more likely that you're going to see these very large meanders, and they're going to stay locked in place for day after day. And when those two things come together, that's when you get unprecedented weather extremes. And we're seeing that play out. And we know, as a matter of fact, that the mechanism that we've described in our scientific articles is actually playing out right now in the pattern we've seen this July.
Wow. Sir, we have about a minute and a half, I think, here before we're going to hit a hard break. The state of pushback, how are we doing, fighting climate change? Obviously, Trump pulled us out of the Paris Accords, but, a lot of companies, a lot of people are still committed to doing something about climate change worldwide. But the Paris Accords weren't binding in any case. Where are we at and what can we do?
Yeah, it's a great question. Where we're at is that the United States right now is the only country in the world that is not committed to the Paris Accord. We are the skunk at the garden party right now under Trump. The Trump administration's policy, as you alluded to, is to threaten to pull out of Paris, whether or not he can really even do that, but to undo a lot of the progress that's been made over decades in acting on a host of environmental problems, including climate change, including all the progress that was made under the previous administration. The Trump administration, his EPA is trying to get rid of the Clean Power Plan, back out of our international commitments, and undo all sorts of regulations that are designed to keep us from accelerating the burning of fossil fuels, blocking incentives for renewable energy, making it more difficult, for example, to sell solar panels to the United States, putting a tariff on solar panels and Chinese solar panels. So across the board, Trump and his, and those he represents, in fact, polluting interests that he represents, have done everything they can to stymie progress here in the United States. The good news is that the rest of the world is moving moving forward. The West Coast states, California, is moving forward under the leadership of Jerry Brown. The New England states, a lot of our largest cities, a lot of our largest companies actually remain committed to our commitments under the Paris Accord. So what that says is we're still making progress. Here's the problem. Paris alone isn't enough to stave off truly catastrophic climate change. We're going to need to improve on the commitments that were made in Paris if we're going to prevent that. This administration seems hell-bent on preventing that. We need to send a signal to the administration and to Congress that we want to join the rest of the world. And how are we going to do that? In less than 100 days now, we've got a midterm election where we can signal we want to join the global community. We don't want the U.S. to be an obstacle. And we have to vote on this issue, on climate.
Amen. Hang on just a second, sir.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Dr. Michael Mann, his website, michaelmann.com, and you can tweet him at Michael E. Mann. Dr. Mann, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. Always a pleasure.
Thanks. And welcome back. Don, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
It's Dion. How you doing, Tom?
Or Dion, I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah, have you had Congressman Ro Khanna on recently?
Last week. Week ago Monday.
Okay, yeah. I believe that if we have Medicare for all, it would cost $32 trillion instead of $49 trillion. So if that saves a lot of money, then how come how come it's not being covered by corporate media?
That's a good question. I mean, the Koch brothers did this study. The Mercatus Center, ran the numbers, and they said, gee, it's going to cost $30 trillion, over the next decade, $3 trillion a year to have single-payer health care. And that is less than we're spending right now. And that doesn't even include, projections for inflation. So Bernie is saying that's about $2 billion less than we're spending right now. So, Bernie sent out an email to everybody yesterday saying thank you to the Koch brothers for making our point. This is just basic math. But you're right, it hasn't been picked up by the media. I haven't seen it on MSNBC, or I don't watch CNN that much, and I don't even have access to Fox. But I'm sorry?
Yeah, the sponsors wouldn't like that, or the prescription drug companies, they wouldn't like it?
I'm guessing that there are a lot of financial interests. The prescription drug companies have to be at the top of that list, who would rather not see, who like our system as it is. There's a fascinating piece in either the Times or the Post this morning, that the New York Times or the Washington Post, talking about how in Hawaii, in one congressional district, there are like 6 Democrats or maybe 8 Democrats running in a primary. And the election's coming up pretty soon. And this lobbying group representing the big insurance companies went out and sat down with about half of them. About half of them took the meeting and went to lunch and listened to the pitch. And we don't know if they took money from them or not. We don't know what's going on. We don't know if they'll be voting against single-payer health care in the Democratic Party. But what we do know from this, and I think it's real important to acknowledge and to spread the word as far and wide as possible, is that the private health insurance industry, the for-profit hospital industry, and the drug industry are getting together and aggressively lobbying now Democratic politicians before they even get elected to office. And basically, I'm assuming that the message would be something like, stick with us and we'll keep the money pouring so that you can get yourself elected and reelected. Just don't vote for single-payer health care. And, I think that we'll see if the Democrats take the House of Representatives, probably one of the very first pieces of legislation that will come out if Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House will be a single-payer health care plan, basically Bernie's plan. And if that happens, it's going to put all these Democrats on the record. And if they can't, if the Democrats control the House and they can't pass their own single-payer plan, that portends big trouble for the Democratic Party in the 2020 election, in my opinion. I think that we really need to be getting our act together right now. But we'll see how this plays out, Dion. Thanks a lot for the call. It's a great topic. It's a great issue, a great question. We'll be back. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Yeah, extreme heat could make 1/3 of the planet uninhabitable. This, according to Dr. Michael Mann in another interview, this is, I mean, when basically conservative scientists, and I don't mean politically conservative, I mean, people who adhere exclusively to the science and don't go off on wild speculations, right? Going off on wild speculations is kind of my job, right? I'm a talk show host. I'm a writer. It's like my job is to imagine the future and say, that this is a possibility, that's a possibility, and we might not want this one, or we might really like this one. That kind of stuff. A scientist's job is to sit down and say, what are the facts? And what's the model that best explains the facts? Well, now that more and more data is going into these models, and we're seeing that as the planet warms, we're getting carbon from sources that are way beyond, factories and cars and cow farts. We're starting to get carbon out of the soil. We're starting to get carbon out of the permafrost up in the Arctic. We're starting to get carbon out of, methane that's under the sea. And this is just not a good thing. Just definitely not a good thing. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in the news. This in particular, I think, is absolutely fascinating. Portugal said to the European Union, the Eurozone is all in austerity right now. The neoliberals took over the Eurozone, and they've been forcing all these countries into austerity. And Portugal said, screw that. We're not interested in austerity. This was in 2015. This was 3 years ago. This is from the New York Times by Liz Alderman. In 2015, Portugal cast aside the harshest austerity measures its European creditors had imposed, igniting a virtuous cycle that now has put its economy back on a path to growth. They reversed cuts to wages, they reversed cuts to pensions, and they reversed the cuts to Social Security, which were all these business people were saying, you got to do this stuff. And the government's U-turn, willingness to spend, had a powerful effect, writes Liz Alderman. Business confidence rebounded, production and exports began to take off. The renewal is visible just about everywhere. Hotels, restaurants, and shops have opened in droves, fueled by a tourism spurge that has helped cut unemployment in half. Foreign investment in aerospace, construction, and other sectors is at a record high. Traditional Portuguese industries, including textiles and paper mills, are putting money into innovation, driving a boom in exports. Now, this is because President Costa, the new leader, was elected in 2015 on a platform of blowing up austerity. So this is like really cool stuff. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day right after this.
We're reading today from Jesse Eisinger's new book, shall we call it the Chicken Poop Club? Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives. This is from the introduction. It's from page 15 in the introduction. Boom, bust, and crackdown. America's economic history is unfolded in a series of booms, followed by busts, followed crucially by crackdowns. After the stock market crash of 1929, congressional hearings channeled public outrage and resulted in landmark laws regulating Wall Street and creating the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934. A few years later, a new SEC helped put the head of the mighty New York Stock Exchange in prison. Though inconsistent, the SEC over the intervening decades emerged as one of the most respected government regulatory bodies. The SEC is the most important corporate regulator, overseeing publicly traded companies in the nation's capital markets, money markets. The agency has civil powers, must team up with the various offices of the Justice Department when a securities laws violation turns into a criminal investigation. After the go-go years of the late 1960s, the SEC worked closely with the Southern District to take on top law firms, top accounting firms, and top executives who had helped perpetrate corporate frauds. After the savings and loan scandals of the 1980s, when hundreds of small banks across the country failed due to reckless real estate loans, the Department of Justice prosecuted over 1,000 people, including top executives of many of the largest failed banks. After the Michael Milken-run junk bomb boom and blow-up of the late 1980s, Prosecutors spent years digging up evidence of stock manipulation and insider trading at major investment banks and law firms, prosecuting some of the most powerful Wall Street figures of the era. In the early 2000s, the NASDAQ bubble burst. The burst NASDAQ bubble revealed a corporate book-cooking pandemic. Top officers from giants such as Enron, WorldCom, Quest Communications, Adelphia, and Tyco International ended up in prison. Recklessness and stupidity fuel booms, but usually so do crimes. By contrast, after the 2008 financial crisis, the government failed. In response to the worst calamity to hit capital markets and the global economy since the Great Depression, the government did not charge any top bankers. The public was furious. Bank bailouts and a lack of consequences for banksters radicalized both ends of the political spectrum and gave rise to two of the most potent social movements of our time, Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. Anger about the lack of Wall Street accountability seeded disenchantment with Obama. The 2016 insurgency of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who challenged frontrunner Hillary Clinton almost to the doors of the Democratic Convention, demonstrated the anger that remained on the left years after the apex of the crisis, undergirding mistrust about Clinton. She had given friendly, fateful, and highly compensated speeches to investment banks. While a Republican president had presided over the crisis and a Democratic one had saved the financial system, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and the Democrats could not claim to be the protectors of the working class and the scourges of investment bankers. That was due in large measure to the lack of corporate prosecutions. According to the Wall Street Journal, analysis of 156 criminal and civil cases brought by the Justice Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission against 10 of the largest banks on Wall Street since 2009, in 81% of the cases, the government neither charged nor even identified individual employees. In the remainder, the government only charged 47 low and mid-level employees. Merely one was a boardroom-level executive whom the SEC charged civilly rather than criminally. In his own incoherent and superficial ways, Donald Trump rode anger about Wall Street throughout his campaign, railing at the bank's power. He closed his campaign by hinting poisonously about a cabal of global bankers rigging the system. He assailed politicians who were owned by Goldman Sachs, Trump's word. His first Ted Cruz in the primary and then Hillary Clinton in the general. The Republican platform called for breaking up the big banks by returning to the Glass-Steagall Act, the Depression-era law that splits commercial bank from investment banking, a reflection of resentment about the government bailout of the financial system as the bankers wriggled free. No sooner had Trump taken office, though, than he rushed to stuff members of that cabal into his White House and cabinet. He and Goldman alumni who advised him moved within days of taking office to unravel Dodd-Frank and loosen restrictions on corporations generally. It's commonplace to observe that no top bankers from the top financial firms went to prison for the widespread malfeasance that led to the 2008 financial crisis. It's such a socially acceptable opinion that no less than an inside-the-beltway figure than the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, said after he was safely out of office that more bankers should have gone to prison. The problem is worse than that. Today's Justice Department has lost the will and indeed the ability to go after the highest level corporate wrongdoers. The problem did not begin in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, and it has not ended. Prosecutors don't simply struggle to put executives for too big to fail banks in prison. They also cannot hold accountable wrongdoing executives from a gamut of large corporations, from pharmaceutical to technology to large industrial operations to retail giants. And, the book goes on from there, laying out exactly who and how and why. It's extraordinary. The Chicken Beep Club.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Mike in Los Angeles. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hey, we had a caller yesterday who was very concerned about non-citizens voting in San Francisco.
Right.
Actually, something like that is happening, but it's not at all what the right-wing websites are claiming it is. basically had a situation where legal resident aliens were paying taxes and had kids in the school and weren't getting to vote in the school board elections.
Right.
So they passed a measure in 2016 which gives them the right to vote in the school board elections only, because, of course, they're citizens of San Francisco, even if they're not citizens of the U.S. However, they have to fill in all the required voter information anyone would for any category of citizenship, and they have to be subjected to that information going to immigration because it's public records. So if there's anybody in the country illegally who tried to sign up to vote in a school board election, they'd be subject to immediate deportation.
Yeah, I figured it was something like that, Mike. I know that there are actually several cities around the United States that have said that people who are not full U.S. citizens but are living here legally and paying taxes and all that kind of stuff, permanent residents, people who've been here in some cases for decades on green cards, that they should have a say in local communities. And so on a limited basis they can vote, but they can't vote in national elections. And I think in most cases they can't even vote in statewide elections. It's just on these local issues.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the clarification, Mike. I appreciate it. I appreciate the call, because I just said no way, and apparently I was wrong. Thanks, Mike. Roderick in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Roderick, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I know this is a hypothetical question, but assuming that the Democrats, which I think they will, take back at least the House this midterm election and take back the White House in 2020, what direction do you think the Republican Party is going to go? Is it going to be more of a libertarian route, which I'm assuming it will be, or are they going to just continue doing what they've been doing since Reagan at least?
Well, I mean, Reagan's direction was a libertarian direction, and the billionaires who basically own most of the Republican Party have been pushing it that way for years, for decades. And they're now getting what they want. I mean, the Koch brothers now, pretty much have their control of the Republican Party. They speak the Republican Party answers. The question is whether Trumpism will survive, because Trumpism is not libertarianism. Libertarians don't believe in tariffs. In fact, libertarians don't even believe in borders. They think that people should be able to move freely across borders in search of economic opportunity. And so the European Union is the European Union is a very libertarian idea in that regard, that piece of it. So what pieces of all this are going to survive if Trump goes down personally? Will that discredit Trumpism? What's going to happen to the vast majority of Americans who actually like tariffs? Is the Democratic Party going to pick that baton back up? Because the progressives already have, but the Democratic Party historically has been the party of tariffs. And the Republicans, the party of so-called free trade or managed trade to the benefit of corporations, shall we say. So there's that issue. There's the whole immigration issue. And I think both parties, it's hard to say. The nativist wing, the basically white racist wing of the Republican Party, which is in ascendance right now, although they represent probably a small portion of the actual electorate, but they're Trump's base. They're not going to go away anytime soon, and so there's a good question as to how the Republicans are going to demagogue that, and I don't know. It's going to be interesting, Roderick. The Republican Party, when Nixon went down in flames, the Republican Party went through some serious changes and came out the backside of that with a plan. And that plan was Jude Wininsky's 1976 Wall Street Journal article suggesting that the Republican Party needed to become the party of the tax cut Santa Claus. And they needed to radically cut taxes and then use that as an excuse to force the Democrats to shoot their Santa Claus, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And Ronald Reagan put that into practice explicitly, and that has been the reinvented Republican Party ever since then. The Koch brothers are fine with that because they think that social service programs are socialism, and they want to see all the welfare programs gone, food stamps gone, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all of that should be privatized in their opinion. And in fact, that's what David Koch ran for vice president on in 1980. His platform's over on Bernie's website. So it's going to depend on, in my opinion, how Trump, if Trump goes down like Nixon went down, what does that mean for the party? And I honestly don't know the answer to the question, but I think those are the major variables. What do you think, Roderick?
Because I know if, which I'm really assuming, I'm cheering them on. I know if Bernie takes the White House in 2020. I know I've heard it on your program. They're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at him.
Oh, sure.
I'm already prepared for that.
Well, not just Bernie. I mean, if it's Elizabeth Warren, if it's Kamala Harris, basically all the Democratic candidates, with the exception, I think, of Joe Biden, have embraced, at least 2/3 of the Democratic Socialist agenda. And so, you're going to have a progressive president in 2020 if the Democrats elect pretty much anybody who's on their list.
Yes.
So, and I think that I welcome that. I mean, and thanks for the call, Roderick. And in fact, apropos of welcoming that, Fox and Friends designed a poll. This is hysterical. Fox and Friends designed a poll asking, here's the question. Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill is estimated to cost $32.6 trillion, new study says. Would the benefit outweigh the costs? Now, they don't point out in that question, it's a very deceptive question, but of course it's from Fox News, so you expect that. But they don't point out that $32.6 trillion is several $trillion less than we're currently spending on health insurance, right? On the access to health care. So it starts out as a lie, but people are figuring this out. 13,000 people voted. And the vast majority of them said that they would like Medicare for all. So, even Fox and Friends is struggling with this stuff right now. Charlotte in Tallahassee, Florida. Hey, Charlotte, what's on your mind?
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful day, Tom, and thanks be to God for you. We are living in some dangerous times, as you were speaking with regard to the fight for the Fourth Freedom Book. I like that book myself. Right now we have, as Kennedy brought forward in his nomination speech to the nation back in 1961, that we have to build a new age of future and history for our people. And we are now at that juncture here in this country where we have had a reverse migration demographic shift in the country, that we've had the demonization have come back to people and certain groups and categories being a part of the polarization, a lack of compromise. And this is because of these oligarchs, and very specifically this Koch brother here in Florida. When Jeb Bush came into Florida 20-plus years ago, as a person who had no political experience, only name recognition from having been a Bush, was supported by this Alex, Koch-funded think tank white paper group, many of them, American Enterprise. You could just start Cato Institute, the libertarian one. You could just start naming all of these different, and the Koch brothers funding, now they're in academia. I'm in academia. And they now have come to the black campuses, HBCUs, over 100 in the nation still. And they've come in because of state disinvestment in HBCUs. And they've come in and purchased these entrepreneurial, market-free set-up centers where they have instituted the professors to be then selected by them. Then they get to choose 25% of the boards. And this is the kind, now because we have exposed their Alex legislative prowl, they now are trying to change their image and say that they want prison reform, that they want what's the other libertarian context that they promote out?
Well, they've been saying criminal justice reform. Sometimes they talk about drug law reform.
Yeah, criminal justice. That's the word. Yes.
Yeah. And by the way, there's a magic piece to that, Charlotte. In their criminal justice reform, they are suggesting that we should change the laws so that if a CEO, if a senior executive in a company makes a decision that leads to somebody dying, that you have to prove that it was their intention that that person died. In other words, they're doing away with the manslaughter defense. Or the ability to prosecute. And it's called,
your ground is here.
Right. It's called mens rea is the legal term, and
what is it called?
Mens, MENS rea, REA, and it means state of mind.
Okay.
And what they're saying is that they want to update the laws. Sure, they're willing to cut some of the drug crimes and some of the sentences and things, but they want to update the laws so that wealthy white executives can no longer be prosecuted for the crimes they're companies commit.
Of their grift.
Yeah.
Yes. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, because I believe in the faith and hope and Brothers Keeper model.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe that we have some issues that will, in fact, unite us. The prison reform, the criminal justice reform, notwithstanding their, because this is just false propaganda. They realize that the country, and you and others very specifically, have exposed their agenda with their corporate agenda, that they have only wanted to create their control over the labor and social network, a privatization of the country. That's all they want. They know we now see them. So this is this propaganda to change their image, to say that they now want nonprofits to be a part of the scope of their work. They now want academe, and they've come in, like I said, and they bought up these schools because we have not been getting investment. But to go back to the hope where I believe we can unite the people to a new collective common good that you talk about. And I just think it's wonderful, that commons. I use that so much in the lecture now.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Because it has a way of really uniting the message. Is, in fact, this new generation of young people who are coming on board to be the new leaders.
Yeah, they get it. Charlotte, we're hitting the break here. I'm sorry, that's what the music is telling us. We've got to go. But thank you for the call. Great contribution to the show.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Welcome back. Dave, watching Free Speech TV in Armstrong Creek, Wisconsin. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom. The issue is climate change, and Amy Goodman's whole program focused on it today, and it was really great. You know the issue as much or better than anybody I listen to, and I just wanted to throw out an aspect of it that nobody talks about. And the Republicans, conservatives, always talk about how much it could cost if we had to do anything about climate change, and they never talk about the cost of cleaning up after these storms and wildfires, floods. You know, I was reading an article in the Foreign Affairs magazine last month, hardly a liberal magazine, and they talked about just the aftermath of the hurricanes, floods, and wildfires in 2017, over $300 billion. That was a conservative estimate. And, don't they understand this? What the cost in the future could be? I live in a really rural county, Forest County. We don't even have a stoplight in our county, if you can imagine that. Surrounded by forests. These kind of fires could easily happen up here under the right conditions, and we have had forest fires up here before. Mm-hmm. And this is solid Trump country. We couldn't get a Democrat, elected to Congress up here if we, it's impossible to, that's where I live. And I love it up here. And I love the people, too. It's just that they're so misinformed about things.
Well, this is because Fox News is ubiquitous. It's available on basic cable for free. You have to pay an extra $5 a month for MSNBC.
Well, even the other media doesn't mention it.
Yeah, it's true. And also on like a Sunday afternoon, if you're looking for news, you have one choice: Fox News. That's it. CNN's doing documentaries. MSNBC is replaying old shows. Fox is the only network that 24/7 has got live news on. And that has earned them a huge audience, and people believe that they're the news station.
Well, I was even listening to Morning Joe the other day. Yeah. And a conservative guy actually articulated how important this issue was. And Joe Scarborough sat there with a stupid look on his face, and he didn't even respond. He just started talking about the the Mueller investigation.
How important the issue of the wildfires was? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, he was talking about climate change in general.
Right.
How important this issue is. This is the issue.
Yes.
You know, it affects everything, and that's what that Foreign Affairs article pointed out too. That this affects everything, not just the economy, but, you know, just the survival of our species.
Yeah, I mean, that's the premise of Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything.
Oh, yeah, I've read that. I've had that for a long time.
Yeah, climate change is the foundational issue.
And the you know, what capitalism has to do with it. Just the free market capitalism system is a big driver of this.
Yeah, yeah.
So, well, hey, thanks for talking to me today.
Amazing stuff. Thank you, Dave. Good talking with you. I appreciate it, and thanks for watching us there in Federal Way, Washington on Free Speech TV. The issue of climate change really and truly, it's like people not paying attention to their blood pressure or something, you know, and then one day they check it and they go, oh my God, my blood pressure is 160/100, and you know, a lot of damage has already been done at that point, and if they don't do something, they're going to die. Well, that's kind of where we're at with climate change in our planet, and we've got to get a handle on this issue really fast. We'll be right back. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Well, welcome back, Steve in Southeast Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, what's up, Tom?
I'm here.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You there?
Yeah.
Why is it that our government uses illegal immigrants for our national census, but they can't vote? I don't understand that.
Because people who are here without documentation are putting money into the economy. They're taking money out of the economy. They're paying taxes in most cases. They are human beings who are using resources. And if you're doing government planning and you're saying, okay, you know, we need a new school in this town, we need more roads over in this town, we need some extra infrastructure here, this town looks like its population has gone down, we can dial back a little bit over there. If you're doing that kind of planning, you need to know where people are. The job of the Census Bureau is not to determine who's legal and who's illegal. The job of the Census Bureau is to determine what the state of affairs is in the United States.
But also, if they're putting taxes into our economy, I mean, wouldn't you think they should be able to vote then?
No,
because they're using
they're not citizens. No, you're making an Alexander Hamilton argument that only people who have money or people who do produce money should be the ones who are voting. People who don't have any money at all should be allowed to vote. No, Steve, I'm not going to go down that road with you. Aaron in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Aaron, what's up? Aaron? Not here.
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my.
There you go. Sure.
And,
so what's on your mind?
So as your guest Dr. Mann stated, we do need to beat back the, creeping climate change and creeping fascism that is taking over our country. But, how do we do that? By voting.
Yep. Which was Michael's final call for action.
Right. And the folks that believe in the four freedoms, we outnumber the folks that don't. So, we need to get out there. And I think, what is most troubling me during this election cycle is that I haven't seen a really concentrated effort of mobilizing voters. In the history of our country, in the history of the world, social movements have required certain elements in order to be successful. And I just don't see those elements present in our current environment. I don't see, a concerted effort for face-to-face popular education of people, why voting is important, how they can do it. I don't see face-to-face, like the Freedom Riders. I don't see folks, rounding people up in buses and taking them to polling places, or, I don't see organization happening at the grassroots level right now to get folks in place to do that.
I think it is. The Democratic Party is working on these things. You've got the, there's a bunch of different groups that are working on these things. It's, Aaron, if you're not seeing it, you need to check in with some of these organizations. There's a lot going on.
I'm absolutely,
the big challenge
checking. I mean,
is fighting. The big challenge is fighting the Republican voter suppression efforts. When you had last year, the guy who is running for governor of Georgia right now, last year pushed 519,000 registered voters in Georgia off the rolls. The majority of them being people who were either Asian, Hispanic, or African American. That was it. This is what accounts for redshift. This is why people go to the exit pollsters and say, yes, I voted Democratic, and it never shows up on the ballot. It's it could be corrupt machines, but it's far more likely that they got a provisional ballot.
Oh, I don't doubt that there are voter suppression efforts, whatsoever. I don't doubt that. But, I'm telling you from a position of, I work from home. I telework, so I'm able to travel. And so I personally have been looking into, organized efforts to go to certain places, like there were during the primaries last season. I would like to travel to a swing state, Arizona, or, someplace here in the West, to go and be a door knocker. I have the ability to take my work on the road with me and do that. And I'm looking. I'm online.
Pick a candidate.
I'm Googling things. I am looking on Reddit. I am looking in the news. I am not seeing any place for me.
Yeah.
To put myself on the line and do this. I saw. So these elements that that previous social movements have required include the popular education. They include music. I saw that in Bernie's campaign, that there were a couple of anthems that were, really rallying people. I saw this at the Women's March. There was a song that was rallying people. I don't see a song rallying people right now.
Yeah.
I don't see folks understanding the importance of voting.
Yeah. I'm sorry you're not seeing it. I am, and I strongly encourage you to check out the indivisible groups and the Progressive Democrats of America. Hang on just a second.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeats.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, T-H-O-M, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Carbon Shock, A Tale of Risk and Calculus on the Front Lines of a Disrupted Global Economy by Mark Shapiro. This is from the introduction. Chaos, uncertainty, unpredictability. Those are the characteristics of the natural world under the pressures being wrought by climate change. Normal patterns of rainfall, temperature, and extreme weather are changing so rapidly that past baselines for these primordial forces are less and less relevant. Scientists have a word for this state of flux. They call it, quote, the end of stationarity, end quote, a term with a powerful meaning. We can no longer rely on past events to predict future probabilities. The ground is shifting beneath our feet. Now it's becoming increasingly clear that the volatility we're seeing in our natural world is reshaping our financial world too. While we try to hold on to our bearings in the status quo and conduct business as usual, new risks are entering into the equation and new costs are creeping out of the balance sheets of corporations and nations. Just as chaotically as climate change is altering conditions here on Earth, it is changing our understanding of the actual costs of just about everything. In the financial realm, as in the natural realm, the past provides fewer and fewer clues to our future. Like the migration patterns of songbirds that no longer correlate to the hatching patterns of their insect prey, or the mountain snowpacks that no longer store water for the dry summer months. The economy is facing similar miscues born of the interactive loop between tumult in the atmosphere and tumult on the earth. Economic calculations are being upended in ways that are similar to how the digital revolution transformed financial decision-making, though on a far more monumental scale. In early 2014, a report by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, produced and reviewed by more than 1,000 scientists and approved by 194 governments, identified the economic impact of the enormous changes underway. Slowing the rate of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere would not have devastating impacts on the economy, as is often feared, but would require a fundamental rethinking of our priorities and of our existing business models. Unstated but clearly implied, new forces will rise and others will fall as the true costs of carbon become an increasingly potent economic factor that can no longer be ignored. In 2013, an insurance industry research association called for an entirely new paradigm for assessing risk because rapid-fire changes in weather and temperature are outpacing traditional actuarial calculations. In other words, we are on the threshold of carbon shock. There are 5 greenhouse gases. Together, these gases of related, though different provenance, are in a circuit of relationships that give them the same ultimate impact, trapping heat in the Earth's lower atmosphere, giving rise to the greenhouse effect. Up from the center of the Earth comes a 100-billion-year-old periodic table of decaying organic fossils in the form of carbon dioxide and methane, embedded in oil, coal, and natural gas, thus the terms fossil fuels. From the combustion of these ancient fossils comes O3, also known as ozone, derived from the interaction of sunlight with CO2 and other hydrocarbons, and O2, nitrous oxide, which in addition to being emitted from, from industrial sources, is also contained in fertilizers and released from soil through agricultural tilling, and a synthesized family of hydrofluorocarbons generated as waste products from the production of other chemicals, primarily refrigerants and pesticides. In the gas world, they are all cousins, baton passers of molecular reaction that conspire to create turmoil in the heavens. Carbon dioxide is by far the most abundant, which is why carbon has become a stand-in reference for all greenhouse gases. It's not that carbon hasn't always had a cost. It's just that, until now, carbon's costs have been, for the most part, invisible. We haven't been accounting for them. Just as an optical illusion tricks the eye into seeing something that's not there, traditional accounting diverts our attention from invisible costs. we only see profits. Keeping these costs a mystery has been fundamental to our economic growth. Businesses benefit from a false ledger in which the environmentally corrosive impacts of the energy they use to produce, distribute, and dispose of everything from almonds to automobiles have been dramatically undercounted. 3,000 of the world's biggest companies, according to the United Nations report, could lose a third or more of their value if calculations of profits included the actual environmental costs. Most of these costs are the result of greenhouse gases emitted from the burning of fossil fuels, from which 82% of the world's energy is derived. Unlike smog or smoke or other acute contaminants, you can't necessarily see greenhouse gas pollution, but we are the involuntary recipients of its steadily expanding effects. These effects come to us fractured in scattered reports of distress, polar bears floating off on melting glaciers, hurricanes tearing into distant coastlines, droughts sending farmers into panic, remote island states sinking into the seas. When, in the summer of 2013, a gas chromatograph perched atop the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii reported that the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere had, for the first time, reached 400 parts per million, it not only triggered alarm bells from scientists, but signaled costs to come. The world's two biggest economies, the United States and the European Union, estimate hundreds of billions of dollars in cost from heat waves, floods, and an accelerating flow of refugees fleeing lands in which they can no longer sustain themselves. Both classify climate change as one of the...
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author most recently of Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. His website, his Twitter handle is Prof Wolff, PROFWOLFF. His websites are democracyatwork.info and rdwolf with 2fs.com. Dr. Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
I mentioned in the first hour of my program today that the New York Times has a fascinating story about how Portugal said to the European Union, you guys all want austerity. You want to cut Social Security. You want to cut pensions. You want to reduce wages. You want to dial back on health care. You want to dial back on housing support. You basically want to, want all of us to contract essentially the welfare state or the support state by 20% or so. And we're not going to do that. Screw that. We're gonna go full steam ahead. They had a leftist president who was elected in 2015, and this was what he campaigned on. And 3 years on, and when he did this, when they said this, the Europeans said, "You're going to go down the tubes fast." And in fact, Portugal's really rocking and rolling right now. It's the only economy in Europe apparently that's really growing. What's going on there? Where did this austerity come from? Where did the idea come from? How did it get its foot and its roots into the Eurozone or the European Union? Why is it being supported by so many countries? And how is Portugal's pushing back on this and proving a proof of concept, demonstrating that this is a bunch of BS?
Well, it's mostly a political question. The government in Portugal is an alliance of three parties. The Socialist Party, the Communist Party, and the Green Party, and together they are running Portugal, and they made the decision that they're not going to do a trickle-down economics, which is what everyone else in Europe pretty much has done, despite elections in places like Greece and France for political parties that were committed to what the Portuguese did but never carried it through. That's the power of ideology, Tom. Basically, the idea is whatever the government does, it has to do it first and foremost by helping those at the top, the wealthiest folks, the corporations, in the presumption that the help to them will trickle down to everybody else. We did that in the United States as well, starting with the stimulus programs under Bush, carried forward under Obama, and now being pursued by Mr. Trump. Trickle down is the orthodoxy with which the people who run the capitalist system try to fix its breakdowns, like the one in 2008. But there was always the alternative, which I like to call trickle up. In other words, what the government does, instead of helping corporations by bailing them out and giving them the big contracts and giving them the big tax cuts, you don't do that. You help the people at the bottom. You give them all kinds of supports, all kinds of government handouts, etc., on the presumption that by doing that, they will all be able then to go out and spend money, and that will stimulate the corporations. In other words, you help those at the bottom, and it trickles up into the coffers of business and eventually the rich people who own and control the businesses. Trickle up has always been an alternative to trickle down. When Franklin Roosevelt became president back in the 30s, in the depths of our depression, he was actually committed to trickle down, as were the people running both political parties. It was the pressure from below of a unionized CIO and all of that back in the 1930s that basically turned him from a trickle-downer into a trickle-upper. And so he began to shift, and that had a lot to do with the ultimate success of the New Deal. And basically what the Portuguese have done is replicate the New Deal and say, we're going in that route. And from just between you and me, the beauty of what they've done is, look, both trickle up and trickle down may fail. Capitalism is a system that isn't easy to fix. But at least you know, if you go the trickle up route, that you've helped the majority of people, whether or not it's a solution that lasts. Whereas if you use trickle down, you've helped the people who need it least and who are a small minority. And if on top of that you get a failure, well, then you really have very little to show for how you handled one of capitalism's terrible downturns.
So why the resistance to trickle up among the rest of the European nations?
Well, because in a sense, it always carries a certain risk. If capitalism, which really everybody recognizes is run by a relatively small group of people who sit at the top of the society and dispense with all of the wealth, etc., if that system breaks down and the only thing you can really do is to help the mass of people from the bottom, you're going to sooner or later stimulate the question on the part of the people at the bottom, the majority, why in the world do we ever allow the system to be run by that minority that got us into the mess, if getting us the help we've always wanted is what gets us out of the mess? Maybe if we ran the show and if the wealth were much more equally distributed, we wouldn't get into the mess, needing us to find mechanisms out. It basically shifts the power distribution, if you like. It shifts the ideological ground of the society to see the problem being produced by the capitalists at the top and the solution being a direct helping of people at the bottom. That's why it was so important in the 30, 40 years after the end of World War II to basically roll back the New Deal, to show hardly in any way possible that helping people at the bottom is the solution. That had to be transformed into being the problem that we now discuss it at. It's kind of a perfect analogy to what you were doing before in showing how faith-based approaches to government policy are such a complete reversal of what Jefferson, Franklin, and others had said.
Yeah, remarkable stuff. Professor Richard Wolff, the other big question I had for you is, how do we measure the benefit of an economy? The metric that is used by the popular press, by and large, is the stock market. Secondarily is the unemployment rate. But it seems that, we've got a great unemployment rate right now. It's very low, and we've got a really high stock market. But it sure looks to me like the majority of Americans, working Americans, are in trouble. 40% of Americans can't sustain a $500 medical expense. They can't deal with it. A $1,000 expense will throw them into bankruptcy. How do we come up with a new way of saying, okay, here's our economic indicator today? This is what it's saying.
Well, I think, here, usually I'm a critic of the economics profession of which I'm a part, but here, to be fair to the economics tradition, A proper school student learns that using one or two indices of how well an economy is doing is silly and absurd, and not only unscientific, it is plain stupid. An economy is a very complicated thing. You don't capture its condition by looking at any one number, and certainly not the stock market level or the unemployment rate. Let me give you just a couple of examples. 10% of Americans own 85% of all the shares. So if the shares, the value of shares on the stock market, what we get by the Dow Industrial Index or the Russell 2000 or any of the others, is an index of how well those 10% are doing who have any kind of stock. And by the way, most of those people don't have enough to make a big difference. So the real beneficiaries of the level of the stock market is a tiny minority of American people. And there's no correlation between the stock market being up and the well-being of the society as a whole. And the same thing applies to unemployment, although it's better than the stock market because at least it's something that's broad-based. But, you know, most Americans are upset, as your comment indicates, not so much by having or not having a job, since the majority of Americans do have a job and have had it throughout this time. But the real question is, what kind of a job? What does it pay? What are the benefits that go with it? What kind of development of the human personality does it make possible? What kinds of opportunities for advancement? What is happening to the young people coming in? And by all of those metrics that I just listed, we are in fact in the kind of trouble that the interesting number you mentioned, the $400 or $500 that most Americans today cannot put their hands on to deal with an emergency, those are the indicators that give you a much richer sense. It's usually the president, to be honest, and not just Trump, but the others too. It's usually the president who gives enormous emphasis in his or her remarks every day on the indexes that make them look good. So yes, the stock market and the unemployment rate make them look good, and they don't mention all of the others that make the insight much richer and much more accurate.
Yeah. So there's no what things would you put into the basket of measurements? You mentioned.
Well, here's some of those that the economics profession routinely teaches. Here's the big one: the distribution of income and wealth. Much better index of how people feel is how they understand their own position in the distribution of wealth, how they compare to the Joneses down the street or to their cousins across the country. How are they faring in terms of the American dream? Is it affordable to them or not? Are they spending, for example, more than 20% of their income on rental, on housing? There's a situation that gives you a lot of insight into the lives that people lead. The level of debt of the country, both its corporate debt, its government debt, and its individual debt would be a very strong sign. The number of, to get more specific, the percentage of young people aged, say, 25 who are still living with their parents is a very famous kind of example. There's a whole rich list that have been developed by economists and sociologists and others trying to get a handle on how you would measure something. Retreating to unemployment and the stock market, that's simply a ploy of those in power who want to have the situation look good, to claim some basis for what they're saying all the time, but it's not a serious effort to understand what's going on.
I remember the King of Bhutan coming up with his National Happiness Index, and it got publicized all over the place. I think whoever comes up with a formula taking those variables and says, okay, here's the Wolf formula, it will be recognized for it. Dr. Richard Wolff, thank you so much for being with us.
All right, Tom. Glad to do it. And talk to you soon.
Yep. Thank you. We'll be right back. Stick around. And welcome back. Kathy in Pleasant Hill, Missouri. Hey, Kathy, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. I'd like to speak to your Missouri voters for just a moment. This coming Tuesday, August 7th, we get to vote no on Proposition A, finally. This will stop Missouri from becoming the 28th right-to-work for less state.
Wow.
Greitens, I think he passed this right-for-work for less thing, I think the first week he was in office. And we were able to pause it, and we got more than enough signatures on the petitions to get it on the ballot. So now we get to decide, not Jefferson City.
That's great.
So,
that's great.
I know. It's awesome. So, Missouri is the battleground state right now.
Yeah,
and
well,
we've got,
you've got apparently about 5% of your Democratic voters have been pushed off the voting rolls in Missouri. So
I heard that. Yes, I heard that yesterday on your show.
Yeah, and I think that as that can be fixed, as more and more people check their voter registration or freak out when they're given a provisional ballot, people just don't understand provisional ballots are never counted, and so they just take them and vote, think that they voted. As people are informed about these issues, Kathy, hopefully that number will start coming down.
I go to vote.org frequently and check mine and my husband's, make sure we're still there. We're still there.
Good.
So I tell everybody to do that.
Good.
Yeah, this is, we got union members from all over working on this right now, phone banking, door to door, and signs everywhere. So
that is great.
August 8th, next Tuesday, everybody.
Vote no on Prop A.
No on Prop A.
Okay.
Right.
Kathy, thank you very much. It's great to hear from you, and keep up the great activism out there. Michael in Knoxville, Tennessee. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I just wanted to kind of challenge you on something that when I watch your program, I watch it quite a bit, and I really enjoy it. Learn a lot, I think, listening to your viewpoints. You always have people calling in and asking, what can we do? What needs to be done to change the political climate? And I always hear the same things. People are angry at the politicians because they are in the pockets of whoever, or they're angry at the voters because we're not well informed enough. And I disagree. I actually think that the problem is in the media. It's all due respect, it's people like you. It's the pundits. It is the people who are in charge of the political discourse that are failing us.
Yeah, I guarantee you I am not in charge of the political discourse, but I think your point is well taken, Michael. If you look at the program, and thank you for the call, you look at the programs that have become highly politicized, which are basically the primetime lineups on Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. And there is a spectrum of discussion that is simply not allowed in those places. There's no discussion of net neutrality. There's no discussion of money in politics. I mean, literally none, for either issue. And these are like core issues, right? The ability of all of us to communicate with each other. There's no discussion of inequality in the United States. These are topics that just don't come up. And you get these very, very wealthy people and these giant corporations and millionaires as TV stars and on the television networks, and they just have no interest in discussing these topics. And I think that we should. I'm with you. Thanks. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 23 minutes past the hour. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeats.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Eddie in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Eddie, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I am well. What's on your mind?
So I've got a question for you. It is your stance that companies should have a moral compass, that they have a social obligation. Is that correct?
No. My stance is that the law should require companies to behave in ways that that comport with the public good, the general welfare. I don't think that you're ever going to get a social conscience out of a company. A company is by definition a sociopath. It's not human beings. It's a legal fiction.
Right, but it should be. Well, a company should be ran with a social obligation or moral compass.
No, it should be run in a way that doesn't harm society, and ideally that actually helps society. The way that we used to do this, for example, Eddie, is we used to forbid executives of companies from compensating themselves with their own stock, so they didn't have an incentive. And we started doing this, by the way, in the 1930s, and because of the way that companies have been behaving in the 1920s that led right to the stock market crash, which is that they were pumping up their own stock by buying back their own shares, and as the stock continued to go up, they'd buy more shares back, and then they would sell those out into the marketplace and make a fortune. And that led directly to the bubble of October 1929. And so we said, you can't do that anymore. That law was undone in the 80s by the Reagan administration, and we've seen the stock market go now to just breathtaking heights. You know, it's at what, 24,000 now? I mean, you know, it just passed 5,000 when Reagan was in office. And so that's one way. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways that you do this. You can do it by local ownership rules. You can do it by secretaries of state enforcing laws that say that, you know, companies have to operate in the public benefit. You can do it by your corporate charter laws. But where are you trying to get with this, Eddie?
Well, my thing is so I'm a business owner, okay, and
as am I.
I ensure that I'm sorry.
As am I.
Okay, and I ensure.
Eddie, your phone just broke up. You need to move your phone so that, you know, you're sending a signal, and try it again. Eddie? Yeah. Eddie is not there. We've lost Eddie. Eddie, you're going to have to call back another time. I'm sorry. Karen in Portland on X-Ray FM. Oh, no, we're hitting a break here. Karen, let me put you on hold, and I'll pick you up on the other side. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, where we help you learn how to win the water cooler wars and talk about the important issues of the day. Stick around. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. Stick around. Neil Howe, and this book was published, I believe, in the late 90s, just FYI. 1998. America feels like it's unraveling. Though we live in an era of relative peace and comfort, we have settled into a mood of pessimism about the long-term future, fearful that our superpower nation is somehow rotting from within. Neither an epic victory nor over communism nor an extended upswing of the business cycle can buoy our public spirit. The Cold War and the New Deal struggles are plainly over, but we are of no mind to bask in their successes. The America of today feels worse in its fundamentals than the one many of us remember from our youth, a society presided over by those of supposedly lesser consciousness. Wherever we look, from L.A. to D.C., from Oklahoma City to Sun City, we see paths to a foreboding future. We yearn for civic character, but satisfy ourselves with symbolic gestures and celebrity circuses. We perceive no greatness in our leaders, a new meanness in ourselves. Small wonder that each new election brings a new jolt, its aftermath, a new disappointment. I'd add this was at the height of the Newt Gingrich and impeachment and all that kind of craziness. Not long ago, America, which is the predecessor, has really set up Donald Trump. Not long ago, America was more than the sum of its parts. Now it is less. Around World War II, we were proud as a people, but modest as individuals. Fewer than 2 people in 10 said yes when asked, "Are you a very important person?" Today, more than 6 in 10 say yes. Where we once thought ourselves collectively strong, we now regard ourselves as individually entitled. Yet even while we exalt our own personal growth, we realize that millions of self-actualized persons don't add up to an actualized society. Popular trust in virtually every American institution, from business and governments to churches and newspapers, keeps falling to new lows. Public debts soar, the middle class shrinks, welfare dependencies deepen, and cultural arguments worsen by the year. We now have the highest incarceration rate and the lowest eligible voter participation rate of any major democracy in the world. Statistics inform us that many adverse trends, crime, divorce, abortion, scholastic aptitudes, may have bottomed out, but we're not reassured. Optimism still attaches to self, but no longer to family or community. This is the consequence of Reaganism. Most Americans express more hope for their own prospects than for their children's or the nation's. Parents widely fear that the American dream, which was there solidly for their parents and still there barely for them, will not be there for their kids. Young householders are reaching their mid-30s, never having known a time when America seemed to be on the right track. Middle-aged people look at their thin savings accounts and slim-to-none pensions, scoff at an illusory Social Security trust fund, and try not to dwell on what a burden their old age could become. Seniors separate into their own leisure world, recoiling at the lost virtue of youth while trying not to think about the future. We perceive our civic challenge as some vast, insoluble Rubik's Cube. Behind each problem lies another problem that must be solved first, and behind that lies another and another ad infinitum. To fix crime, we have to fix the family, but before we do that, we have to fix welfare, and that means fixing our budget, and that means fixing our civic spirit, but we can't do that without fixing moral standards, and that means fixing our schools and churches, and that means fixing the inner cities, and that's impossible unless we fix crime. There's no fulcrum upon which to rest a policy lever. People of all ages sense that something huge will have to sweep across America before the gloom can be lifted. But that's an awareness we suppress. As a nation, we're in deep denial. While we grope for answers, we wonder if analysis may be crowding out our intuition. The reward of the historian is to locate patterns that recur over time and to discover the natural rhythms of social experience. In fact, at the core of modern history lies this remarkable pattern. Over the past 5 centuries, Anglo-American society has entered a new era, a new turning, every 2 decades or so. At the start of each turning, people change how they feel about themselves, the culture, the nation, and the future. Turnings come in cycles of 4. Each cycle spans the length of a long human life, roughly 80 to 100 years, a unit of time the ancients called seculum. Together, the 4 turnings of the seculum comprise history's seasonal rhythm of growth, maturation, entropy, and destruction. The first turning is a high, an upbeat era of strengthening institutions and weakening individualism, where a new civic order implants and the old values regime decays. The second turning is an awakening, a passionate era of spiritual upheaval when the civic order comes under attack from a new values regime. The third turning is an unraveling, a downcast era of strengthening individualism and weakening institutions when the old civic order decays and the new values regime implants. And the fourth turning is a crisis, a decisive era of secular upheaval when the values regime propels the replacement of the old civic order with a new one. Each turning comes with its own identifiable mood. Always these mood shifts catch people by surprise. In the current seculum, the first turning was the American high of the Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy presidencies. As World War II wound down, no one predicted that America would soon become so confident and institutionally muscular, yet so conformist and spiritually complacent. But that's what's happened. The second turning was the consciousness revolution, stretching from the campus revolts of the mid-60s to the tax revolts of the early 80s. Before John Kennedy was assassinated, no one predicted that America was about to enter an era of personal liberation and cross a cultural divide that would separate anything thought or said after from anything thought or said before. But that's what happened. The third turning has been the culture wars, an era that began with Reagan's mid-1980s Morning in America and is due to expire around the middle of the decade, 8 or 10 years from now. Amid the glitz of the early Reagan years, no one predicted that the nation was entering an era of national drift. Talk media for the rest of us. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. The director of the FBI and several of the other national security officials are holding a press conference in which they're talking about how they're going to be pushing back against foreign interference in our elections and saying this is all real and, basically don't pay any attention to what Trump says. They didn't actually say that, but I am. There's also in the news, this is in the Dallas Morning News today, a toddler died recently after being released from the nation's largest immigration detention center. An official with the American Immigration Lawyers Association said on Wednesday, this was yesterday afternoon, I got news of this after I got off the air. I retweeted the story, and somehow I had it in my head that I'd talked about it on the air yesterday. Apparently I didn't, and so I'm bringing it up again. This is a family detention center with 2,400 beds. And apparently the charge that the AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, is making or suggesting or implying is that this little baby got pneumonia or something like pneumonia. It was a respiratory infection that caused her to die while in this facility, and then was discharged and died a day or two later of the disease that she acquired there. And they're looking for other lawyers. They're trying to confirm this with the family. This is a moving story right now, moving both in terms of heartbreaking and moving in terms of we don't have all the details and like that. There's also a hunger strike by fathers separated from their families being planned for another facility in Karnes, Texas, according to people from the legal group Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services, RACES, reported over at BuzzFeed News. So this is serious stuff. Trump, in fact, what I tweeted last night was, is it fair now to say that the entire Trump administration, or at least that, John Kelly, we're going to do this to discourage them, Kirsten Nielsen, the director of Homeland Security, the ultimate boss of ICE, and Donald Trump himself, is it time to say that these people now, at least metaphorically, have blood on their hands? It sure seems like it to me. Mark in Gaylord, Michigan. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm a longtime listener, first-time caller, and I absolutely love your show. I've been listening for about 5 years. I was just wondering, and I haven't heard anything talked about this, but I was just wondering if you think there's a correlation between all the dark money from Russia funding the NRA to our Republican senators and congressmen that are on the dole with the NRA that are maybe trying to stop the investigation with Robert Mueller?
The NRA?
Yeah, well, I know that they have received a lot of dark money.
Yeah, apparently, according to the government, $40 million has come into the NRA from Russia and then moved out of the NRA into the Trump campaign. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I just wondered, because the NRA funds a lot of Republican congressmen and senators, do they not? And I was just wondering if there's some sort of a correlation between that and maybe them maybe being on the dole for Russia, And
it's possible. I think more likely, that the NRA is basically a trade organization that represents the gun manufacturers, and they will take influence wherever they can get it. They'll take money wherever they can get it, and they'll do whatever they think they can get away with. So, and I should say it's not necessarily the government that's saying that they moved the $40 million here and there. It's the press reports are suggesting that, and in some cases quoting the government. But I think that the important lesson here, and I suspect we're watching history be repeated. I may be very wrong, but I suspect we're watching history be repeated. In 1999 or 1998, the most powerful lobbying group in Congress was the tobacco lobby. They were mind-bogglingly powerful. They could kill any bill. They were kingmakers in Washington, D.C. After that giant lawsuit that Mike Papantonio took part in, where they basically took down the tobacco industry and made them pay, essentially reparations, the tobacco lobby became one of the least powerful. I mean, literally in 1 year. And now the NRA has stopped issuing grades to politicians. And I think they're doing it because politicians no longer want to be affiliated with the NRA. So I think that the NRA's day has come to an end. And Ollie North has a nice job for the rest of his life, but I just don't think that the NRA is going to be the player that they've been in the past. We'll see. I could be wrong, but I think that that's what's going on. Mark, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to let the people around the rest of the country know the problem of gerrymandering, which is a long festering problem locally and in different states, has basically been struck down for the congressional districts in Pennsylvania. And this November, for the first time, I'm in a very populous county, Montgomery County, right next to the northwestern border of the city of Philadelphia, over 820,000 people. For the first time, will be almost a complete congressional district itself. Will be, for the first time, actually send somebody from Montgomery County to represent us, because right now the county is carved up into so many congressional districts, about 5 of them, and none of the people who are, including my elected congressman, who I think is a good guy, is from Montgomery County. 820,000 people, and not one person from the county in Congress to represent us.
Wow.
So we're looking at a complete restructuring, which is going to have national implications. Now, I'm an elected Democratic committee person in Montgomery County. The overwhelming amount of registered voters in Montgomery County and in the state of Pennsylvania is Democratic. There's 1 million more registered Democrats in the state of Pennsylvania than there are Republicans.
And yet, after the last election, you sent something like 13 Republicans to Congress and 5 or 6
13 Republicans
Democrats.
and 5 Democrats. You're going to see that not completely be reversed, but you're going to see, I would say, probably 8 or 9 Democrats. And what's going to be important about that, and this is something else, because we're I think mischaracterized in a lot of ways due to the Trump phenomenon. The 5 Democratic congressmen, they're all men, so until or hopefully the woman who's representing Montgomery County as a state rep moves into Congress, they're all co-sponsors of H.R. 676, which is Medicare for all.
Right.
Now, none of these guys is going to say they're a socialist Democrat or a Democratic socialist. They're just Democrats around here.
Yeah. Well, the first guy to introduce that.
She wants to support it too. All the people around here who are running for Democratic congressional districts that have just been newly formed are all 100% in favor of Medicare for all, H.R. 676. As are 60% of the Democratic Congress people in Congress right now.
And the thing that people forget, Paul, is that the first time the equivalent of H.R. 676, it wasn't called Medicare for all at the time because Medicare didn't exist, but the first Democratic politician to actually introduce legislation or propose legislation to create a national single-payer health insurance program was Harry Truman, President Harry Truman. So you don't have to say that you're a Democratic socialist to support Medicare for all. You can say that you're a Truman Democrat, who was among the most conservative of all the Democrats. He wanted to do it because it would save money for business.
Yeah, absolutely. They can move that cost off their book.
That's right. That's right. Harry Truman
shifting.
thought it would stimulate the economy, and it would have. It actually would have, and it will when it finally happens. Paul, good on you for being a precinct committee person, and thanks for the heads up and the conversation. It's fascinating. Jesse in Miami. Hey, Jesse, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Hey, universal basic income.
Right. A
lot of people like the idea, but always you hear the subject, how it's going to be paid for.
Mm-hmm.
So I know mostly everybody remember that classic question that was asked during the crash back in 2008. How do you print money from nothing? Was asked of the, Chairman Bernanke then.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it comes from you, America. And then, of course, since then, the rich has been bailing themselves out.
Yep.
So you're a businessman. If you just assume that the Federal Reserve gave you money, God forbid you, and you know where I'm coming from with that.
Mm-hmm.
But you give it to, popes and the other too big to jail people, you know what's going to happen to that money. and we suffering for it now. So if you're a businessman and you was put in, my thing for you, if Bernie would have got president, was you to be the head of the Treasury. So if you was head of the Treasury, how would you work out a universal basic income?
I would make it part of a two-step. It's a great question, Jesse. Thank you for asking. I would make it part of a two-part program, maybe even a three-part program. But the first would be that the government would be the employer of last resort, because there's a lot of people who want to have an income that's based on work, on meaningful work that they're doing. And so what I would do is I would look across the country at the $3 trillion worth of infrastructure repair that we need and all the possibilities beyond that. For example, creating community-owned broadband and wiring cities for community-owned broadband and things like that. I would look at those things and then say, okay, we're going to, the government is going to hire people to do these things. We're going to make this happen. And then the people who kind of fall through the cracks, I think the universal basic income would be more applicable to. Although, I think that UBI has a lot going for it, but all of the experimentation programs so far, none of them have really demonstrated, a tremendous benefit, but none of them have demonstrated the, oh, it's going to fail kind of thing, which is what the conservatives are all hysterical about. But I would make it part of a larger program. Jesse, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In about 4 minutes, we're going to check in with Talk Media News, find out what's at the top of the news today in America. Stick around. And welcome back. Rolf in Linwood, Washington. Hey, Rolf, what's on your mind today? Grabbing your phone, Rolf? Rolf? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Rolf, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. It's not working. Call back. Derek in Tyler, Texas. Hey, Derek, what's on your mind today?
Thanks, Tom. I guess I'm calling in regards to the concerns regarding our elections because, effectively our democracy is at war with an intelligence apparatus right now.
It seems. Yeah, we are talking about the Russian intelligence officers who were indicted by by Mr. Mueller.
Yes, exactly. And I guess what's concerning for me is Trump telegraphs everything he's going to do in advance through tweets, and he's recently tweeted that there was no collusion except for Hillary and the crooked Hillary and the Democrats.
Right.
And this bothers me because if we're worried about them stacking votes, hacking our elections for the Republicans, but they could do it for the Democrats and then give false credence to Trump's accusations. And this,
wow, that's a two-layer conspiracy theory there.
It is a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but these are intelligence apparatuses, and they're using techniques that our CIA has used for years.
Yeah.
And
so you're
really
suggesting that the Russian intelligence might flip an election on behalf of the Democrats in a way that they would get caught doing, so that the Republicans could say, "See, the Russians are helping the Democrats too." Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's very fearful. And it's not just me. I've heard a lot of people that are just kind of like they're really disillusioned with the integrity of our election system now.
Right.
And they really fear that maybe the damage has been done and can't be reversed.
Yeah, I don't think the damage is irreversible. I think we've gone way down the road of toward oligarchy. I mean, way down that road. But I think that we can still turn back. I just think it's going to take a crisis to provoke it. It always has. The last time was after the great stock market crash. The time before that was after the Civil War. The time before that was after the crash of 1770. I mean, there's always an economic crash that precedes major social change and political change.
Yeah.
So.
I agree. I guess I was just kind of like, I guess I'm trying to figure out a way to ease these conspiracy tensions with people that I speak with on a daily basis. So that they don't become so disillusioned they don't show up to vote.
Oh, well, you know, the simple answer is, you know, if you don't like the way things are going, find politicians that you can actually believe in and just throw your heart and soul into the effort, you know. Go door to door for them. I mean, don't just vote for them. You know, send their campaign $10. You know, tweet about them on the internet, talk about them on you know, in chat rooms and message boards, you know, promote them on Facebook. I mean, there are so many things that you know, call on their behalf. Do canvassing, you know, but you can do it from home, sitting with your telephone. If you find, this woman who called earlier and said, you know, nobody wants her voluntary help. Find a campaign for a progressive Democrat who you really care about. Contact the campaign. I guarantee you. Yeah, I guarantee you they will provide you with the tools you need to do these kinds of things. Derek, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV there in Tyler, Texas. Excuse me, we'll be right back. Bob Ney will be with us. Stick around. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report is underwritten by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is the author of Sideswiped, the book on the greasy machinations of Washington, D.C., how it all works, is Bob Ney. Congressman, welcome back.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
So what's going on in the world today?
Well, I'm sure you've covered tweet madness, so I won't go there.
No, I haven't, actually. I tend not to cover Trump's tweets.
Oh, okay.
So feel free.
Okay, I can do a little bit of that because there are some other real big issues. But, of course, he tweeted about the Attorney General and the response back about his tweet where he says the Attorney General should shut down the Mueller investigation. The defense, of course, back from the White House is twofold. One, that he has an opinion is what he has. And second, the Attorney General cannot shut it down. But the Attorney General is the boss of the person who can shut it down, which is, as we know, Rosenstein. So, obviously, Sarah Huckabee Sanders was trying to, quote, clarify because a bone of contention is the president and his ability or not of obstructing justice through these tweets.
Her argument that he said should instead of must really falls apart when you consider the power differential between the President of the United States and the Attorney General. When somebody, the President holds the Attorney General's job in his hands, he holds his income in his hands, he holds his reputation in his hands, he has the ability to do great damage to the Attorney General personally. And so when somebody with that kind of power over you says you should do something, you typically do it. And so I think his argument, or Sarah Huckabee Sanders' argument, that this is not obstruction of justice is pitiful. Back to you, Bob.
Right. And it's amazing, Tom, that the attorneys are letting him comment on this at all.
Yeah.
I don't think they can.
I don't think they can stop him. I think it's, this is, you're seeing Trump's id.
Right. And there's a couple of other issues. One's kind of high profile, and the other is not getting the attention, I don't think, yet that it deserves. The high profile one are the plans being announced today by the administration to freeze the fuel efficiency requirements for our nation's cars and trucks through 2026.
Right.
So this is a massive regulatory rollback. It's going to have a big legal battle, especially with California And it would also revoke California's longstanding waiver, which they have on its own tailpipe restrictions. That was granted back in 1970 through the Clean Air Act.
Yeah, and what that did was California had stricter emission standards, and so those functionally became the emission standards for the country. Since there's over 30 million people living in California, there's a hell of a lot of cars there. So the car manufacturers just adopted California's standards, and this all has to do with promoting fossil fuels. I mean, this is the Koch Industries, ExxonMobil agenda.
Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that's correct. And then the other issue, which again I don't see at least as getting the attention that it really should be, is the expansion of what we so-called short-term insurance plans. Mm-hmm. And that's the significant steps that the president is taking, and that, of course, would completely march backwards from the Affordable Care Act. The president, when President Obama was there, he had a 3-month ability for some of the short-term insurance plans, which would be kind of a stopgap till you get into a program, right? But under the Trump administration, Tom, the Department of Health and Human Services are finalizing their regs, and they were done yesterday. That will let people hang on to short-term plans for up to 3 years.
Right.
So,
yeah, I went off on this at some length yesterday. This is bizarre, and it's going to destroy Obamacare because young healthy people are going to be buying these plans and not buying Obamacare, which means that Obamacare is going to be, most of their customers are going to be older, sicker people, which is going to wipe them out.
Right. United Health is going to be the big
up.
winners, and the losers are going to be people that have pre-existing, conditions. Obviously, are going to be losing in it. But I did want to mention, because one point too. He may be doing this now, but another point, Tom, is that he may very well be helping to do the final stages for the destruction of the ACA, which may actually lead eventually to single payer, or as people say, they're wrapping it into Medicare, a pay-as-you-go Medicare plan.
Right.
So he may actually, in the long run, be doing something. It's going to be painful, but it might lead to.
I think by destroying Obamacare, by destroying the existing for-profit system and jacking up the prices on everything, Trump is actually opening the door to Medicare for all. And it's getting more and more popular. I mean, Fox News just did a poll, Fox and Friends just did a poll, and overwhelmingly people said they wanted Medicare for all.
Right. And so I think indirectly he may be doing that. Not that he intends to do that, actually, but it may be indirect. And then the other story that we are carrying today, with Talk Media News, is the story about the sanctions in Turkey, and of course Pastor Brunson. But what's particularly kind of strange on this story is, at least in our analysis, is trying to find out why the president took such drastic steps. Now, it's not that Brunson is not the victim of a kangaroo court or the victim of, some bad policies within the Prime Minister of Turkey, but the fact remains that the sanctions and the shutdown, over one individual, is quite interesting.
I think you're seeing the lobbying of Trump by the religious right.
That's what I was.
They've turned this guy into a martyr, because Trump has a hotel in Turkey, and Trump loves Erdogan. He's the kind of despot that Trump himself wants to be. So there's got to be an external force that's substantial, and I think it's Trump. Trump wants the Christian vote to turn out for him and for Republicans in the election, and this is the price he has to pay for it. Bob Ney, thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from my book, We the People, A Call to Take Back America, which was published back in 2004. This was during the Bush administration. It's an illustrated nonfiction book, and this is from the chapter titled They're Back, page 84. Today, the conservatives are set to complete what the railroad barons pushed the Grant administration to start. That would have been in the 1880s, to take democracy and its institutions of governance, which the founders fought and died for, from the hands of humans, citizens, and voters. They're handing control to the very types of monopolistic corporations the founders fought against when they led the Tea Party revolt against the East India Company in Boston Harbor in 1773. In June of 2003, despite protests from millions of Americans, corporate-friendly Michael Powell's FCC lifted some of the last tattered restrictions on media ownership, allowing absolute concentration of the voices we hear into a tiny number of corporate hands. On another front, a major multinational corporation has claimed the right to deceive people in its PR as its First Amendment right to free speech. The New York Times Corporation editorialized in support. Even the ACLU, unable to see the forest for the trees, adopted a misguided advocacy seeking to preserve First Amendment rights, even for corporations who don't legitimately warrant them. In addition, as much as half the federal workforce is slated to be replaced by corporate workers under a new Bush edict. Keep in mind this was 2004. Government, which doesn't have constitutional human rights of privacy and so is answerable to we the people, will then, once big chunks of government are privatized, will then be able to use Fourth Amendment rights of privacy to hide what those workers do and how they do it from the prying eyes of citizens and voters. In a similar fashion, corporate-owned and thus unaccountable to the people voting machines are being installed nationwide. In the last election, these machines often produced vote results so different from exit polls that pollsters who have been successfully calling elections for over 50 years threw their hands up and closed shop. And in the ultimate irony, the man in charge of the Bush administration's economic policy, Secretary of Treasury John Snow, is a multimillionaire campaign contributor, chairman of the Business Roundtable, an elite core of 100 of the nation's most powerful corporate CEOs, and himself a railroad baron. It's a sorry state of affairs, and it shouldn't be that way. Corporations are created by humans to further the goal of making money. And as engineer, architect, and writer Buckminster Fuller said in his brilliant essay, Grunch of Giants, corporations are neither physical nor metaphysical phenomena. They are socio-economic ploys, legally enacted game playing. Corporations are non-living, non-breathing legal fictions. They feel no pain. They don't need clean water to drink, fresh air to breathe, healthy food to consume. They can live forever. They can't be put in prison. They can change their identity or appearance in a day. They can change their citizenship in an hour. They can rip off parts of themselves and create entirely new entities. Some have compared corporations to robots in that they are human creations that can outlive individual humans, performing their assigned tasks forever. Scientist and prolific author Isaac Asimov, when considering a world where robots had become as functional and intelligent as, and more powerful than, their human creators, posited 3 fundamental laws that would determine the behavior of such potentially dangerous human-made creations. His 3 laws of robotics stipulated that non-living creations must obey humans and never behave in a way that would harm humans. In some famous fictional scenarios, we see the consequences of letting human creations operate without adequate restrictions or limitations. In Arthur C. Clarke's 2001, the onboard computer HAL seizes control of the spaceship from the humans therein. The Terminator film series depicts a time when human-built machines wage war against humanity itself. And in the Matrix films, machines use humans much as we now use them. Asimov's idea was profound, but not altogether original, of course. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison beat him to it by about 200 years with an idea that a constitutional amendment was needed to ensure that the reach of corporations was limited. Something seems to have slipped since then. Until 1886, it was a felony in most states for corporations to give money to politicians or otherwise try, through either lobbying or advertising, to influence elections. Such activity was called bribery and influencing. And the reason it was banned was simple. Corporations can't vote, so what are they doing in politics? And numerous additional laws were passed to restrain corporations from involvement in politics during the era of President Teddy Roosevelt, who said there can be no effective control of corporations while their political activity remains. In Wisconsin, for example, the penalty for any corporate official violating the law and getting cozy with politicians on behalf of the corporation was 5 years in prison and a substantial fine. Prior to 1886, corporations were referred to in U.S. law as artificial persons, similar to the way Star Trek portrays a human-looking robot named Data. Like Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, state laws like that of Wisconsin prevented corporations from harming humans while still allowing people to create their robots, their corporations, and use them to make money. The Wisconsin law said no corporation doing business in this state shall pay or contribute or offer consent or agree to pay or contribute directly or indirectly any money, property, free service of its officers, employees, or thing of value to any political party, organization, committee, or individual for any political purpose whatsoever. We the people. And how you can fight back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Talk Radio for the sane among us. Thom Hartmann here with you. I mentioned in the last hour Harry Truman as the guy who was the first Democrat to actually propose legislation that was what today we would call Medicare for all. Back then it was referred to as a single-payer healthcare system, a nationwide single-payer healthcare system that would cover everybody. And Harry Truman proposed that because he believed it would be good for business. Harry Truman was a businessman. He was a haberdasher from Missouri. He was, he owned a hat shop. And, in fact, the Democrats, they got him in there because they liked, his kind of pro-business. They were worried that FDR was going too far to the left and all this kind of stuff. And there was this backlash happening. And Truman turned out to be pretty progressive himself, which was really cool. I started to share a quote with you yesterday, and I ran into the break, and so I got cut off in the middle. So I'm going to read the entire quote, and then I want to talk about how this ties into what's going on with regard to healthcare in the United States right now, and where we're going in this country with regard to single-payer healthcare and things like that. Harry Truman said, "Republicans approve of the American farmer, but they're willing to help him go broke. They stand foursquare for the American home, but not for housing. They are strong for labor, but they are stronger for restricting labor's rights. They favor the minimum wage. The smaller the minimum wage, the better. They endorse educational opportunity for all, but they won't spend money for teachers or for schools. They think modern medical care and hospitals are fine for people who can afford them. They consider electrical power a great blessing, but only when the private power companies get their rake off. They think American standard of living is a fine thing, so long as it doesn't spread to all the people. And they admire the government of the United States so much that they would like to buy it." And that's, Harry Truman, and it's just so true today. And what's mind-boggling is, he said that in the 1940s, and here, saying that Republicans don't like schools, they don't like funding schools, they don't like, health care, medical care, they want to be sure that power is private. He just nailed it. And they're still doing the same things and still singing the same songs. And, and then they get a bunch of folks in typically in rural areas in small town America places that are largely or entirely white, and get them all cranked up about illegal immigration and brown people are flooding the country and oh my God, it's MS-13 and those gay people are going to come after you and et cetera, et cetera. They figure out, they otherize as many of us as possible, and so that they essentially view themselves now as the other. The gun-toting, NASCAR-loving, Fox News watching, white family. This is it. And this is, what the Republican base is down to. But these are the very people who are being harmed by Donald Trump's policies. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, he's eviscerating, he's chopping it up, tearing it apart. And it has helped us, and mostly low-income people, recover over $15 billion that was stolen from them by banks. Of course, the banksters are big funders of the Republican Party, which is why Mick Mulvaney and now this new person is coming into the CFPB, are doing this stuff. But, the story I think that is worth reminding you of is a story that I did on this program back in 2014. And it lasted for a couple of weeks. And, had we been Republicans, everybody would still remember Charlene Dill's name. But because the Democrats tend to go from issue to issue to issue rather than grabbing a couple of really big things and just pounding on them forever like the Republicans do, like, Benghazi or whatever, Charlene Dill has been forgotten, and I think that that's a great tragedy. Charlene Dill was a 32-year-old mother with 3 kids, ages 3, 7, and 9. A boy and 2 girls. And in fact, her son looks so much like my son that I saw the picture of them yesterday and I had to call Louise over and say, hey, take a look at this. She made her living. She lived in a trailer near Kissimmee, Florida, near Orlando, Florida. She made her living cleaning people's houses and babysitting. And she finally got a third job selling vacuum cleaners for the Rainbow Vacuum Cleaner Company. And she had a heart condition. And she had 2 medications to take for the heart condition that she couldn't afford. So when President Obama passed Obamacare, Charlene presumably was excited, hey, I can get my medications paid for. And then the Supreme Court took up the case, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, NFIB v. Sebelius versus the Secretary of HEW. And the Supreme Court took up the case and said, if Florida doesn't want to expand Medicaid to all of its people, no big deal. Now, Charlene was making between $9,000 and $11,000 a year. In Florida, if you make under $12,000 a year, you're not eligible for Obamacare. And if you make over $4,000 a year, you're not eligible for Medicaid, the health insurance for the truly poor. So Charlene fell right in the middle of that slot. She's made more than $4,000 and less than $12,000 a year. And as a consequence, she was not eligible for Medicaid expansion because Rick Scott, the Republican governor of Florida, said, we are not going to take that $51 billion that the federal government is offering us, which will stimulate our state and save our citizens. We're not going to take it because, the Koch brothers don't want us to, and we really love all the money they give us and all the support they give us, fundamentally. And I mean, nobody actually came out and said that, but it sure looks like that's what's going on. This is, you've got Republican governors all across the United States, with 2 or 3 exceptions, who have taken steps to actually harm their own citizens in order to suck up to libertarian billionaires. So Charlene Dill was cutting her pills in half or whatever she was doing. She was not taking her medications the way that she was supposed to. And she had worked a long and exhausting day, which is not good for people who have heart conditions. And she had been babysitting in the morning. She'd been cleaning houses all afternoon. And then she had 2 leads for people who might want to buy vacuum cleaners out in Kissimmee. Nice upper middle class families who, and so she drove her car out to one of them and was making a sales pitch in their living room as she dropped dead. 3 children now, orphans. Essentially, she was in the process of divorcing her husband at the time. Except that she couldn't afford the divorce, so she was she had moved out and all this kind of stuff. Charlene Dill Dead because of Rick Scott. Dead because of the Supreme Court. Dead because of the challenge that was launched to the Supreme Court by the National Federation of Independent Businesses, which claims to be an organization that represents small business. But if you go over to SourceWatch, they take a lot of money from the Koch brothers groups and people affiliated with the Koch brothers. So once again, you've got, eccentric libertarian billionaires' fingerprints all over this thing, and it's happening all over the country. This is just a screaming tragedy. And then on top of that, you look at this, Fox and Friends yesterday said, it's going to cost $32 trillion to do Bernie care, Medicare for all. Do you think it's worth it? Without pointing out, by the way, that if you don't do Bernie care, it's going to cost you 34, 35, maybe $40 trillion. But the majority of Fox and Friends viewers, apparently, I mean, it's an online poll, so they're probably going to be claiming, oh yeah, that was, those were trolls who voted all over and over again in our poll. But I think they're pretty good at keeping that from happening. But the majority of people voted in the poll to say, yeah, we want Bernie care. We want single-payer health care. Pretty straightforward stuff. Meanwhile, in another story in the news, the cities of, apropos of this, the cities of Baltimore, Cincinnati, Chicago, and Columbus, Ohio, today filed a new lawsuit against Trump, saying that his cutting away at the Affordable Care Act, specifically by expanding these placebo policies, these short-term, right now you can only sell them for 90 days, and they don't cover pre-existing conditions, and they don't cover maternity, they don't cover pregnancy, things like that. So they're pretty useless health insurance. You get sick, you lose your insurance, basically, or at least according to the American Cancer Society. That he's expanding from 90 days, the period of time that health insurance companies can sell these cheapo policies, to 3 years, which is going to siphon young, healthy people away from Medicare and leave Medicare, with the vulnerable and the sick. What they're alleging is that the president has, quote, waged a relentless effort to use executive action alone to undermine and ultimately eliminate the Affordable Care Act. And it sure looks like that's true. And this is a real tragedy for America and for all Americans. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's coming up on 16 and a half minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The place where despair is not an option. Stick around. And welcome back. Don in Lakeport, California. Hey, Don, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Well, I just want to give thanks to all the firemen that are out here busting their buns.
Oh, yeah.
This fire.
Yeah.
And, the fire got a half mile away from my house, and they stopped it.
That's got to be scary.
As well as other ones. And, we get a lot of naysayers and a lot of negative people. These guys are giving it their all. And, sure, they're getting paid. But how many people go to work knowing that they could possibly die?
Yeah.
Very few. So I just want to thank them all.
Okay. Done.
That's it.
I agree with you, Don. Thank you very much for the call, and I share your tip of the hat to our firefighters. Another example of what government can do right. I mean, it's just very straightforward. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hi, Dr. Tom. And all of the talking that everybody does of getting us expanded Medicare for all, this is something I go around trying to teach when I'm out, and about. Has anyone tried to explain to the corporations what it would mean to them if all of their employees are on expanded Medicare for all, and how much it would save them instead of trying to help people get insurance? Has anybody tried to teach the CEOs of, say, like GM or Ford or Chrysler what it would mean to their businesses if all of their employees are on Medicaid for all?
It was big business that was supporting Harry Truman when he wanted to do single payer.
Yes.
So I think that this is not a secret in the corporate boardrooms. They know how much they spend on healthcare. Although you've got a bunch of companies, with the Walmarts of the world, who don't offer good health insurance, and when they do, you have to pay for part of it, and all this other kind of stuff. And the larger companies that offer no health insurance at all, and I don't want to name names because I'm not sure exactly who that is, but there's a lot of companies, particularly big retail companies, food services companies. They're not offering any health insurance. What they're looking at is if everybody gets health insurance through Medicare for All, their taxes are going to go up. It's going to be paid for in part by a raise in corporate taxes, and so they're opposed to it.
But this is also an expense. Every company that pays a payroll and matches the Medicare contribution, matches the Social Security contribution, these are the only two programs that we, the people, have. None of these corporations even offer a pension to people. And so if you can get these idiots, in my view, to wake up to the fact that if they would give everybody expanded Medicare for all, cover everything, and increase Social Security so that people, when they retire, they know they're going to be safe. This would create a stable economy.
Yes.
What people pay here for Blue Cross Blue Shield, our biggest, is a house payment or even a car payment. And we have ads every day, come buy a car.
Right.
But these people cannot buy a car when they do not know what their health insurance is going to be.
Right. And the other advantage to business, and this would even be to the business that doesn't offer health insurance, is the public health advantage. When the broad base of the population has access to health care, diseases are less likely to travel because people get treatment. You'll see less turnover in your employees. You'll see a healthier workforce. Those are all good things. Those are all social benefits that we all need to be promoting. Norma, thank you for the call. And as usual, you knock it out of the park. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom.
Want to connect?
You and Rolf. I asked you to call back. Your phone croaked. Hey, Rolf in Linwood, Washington. Where were we? Rolf? Don't tell me his phone is doing it again. Oh, man. Okay. Two strikes, you're out, I guess. Aaron in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Aaron, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
Couple things. You mentioned that gal just recently about how she passed away selling the vacuum. And it didn't really make sense that she could have. How could she have 3 jobs and only make $10,000 a year? She must not be reporting all of her income. She's going through a 4th divorce. I am not feeling bad for this lady. I mean, I'm sorry she died, but I'm not going to blame the government of Florida and our Medicare system for an individual situation. Okay, that is the problem.
So Aaron, I'm guessing that the position that you're taking is you don't think that the government should be providing health insurance to people. Is that the bottom line here?
No, I think the government should try to get out of as much stuff as they can.
Why not?
They do not solve anything.
Aaron, why not?
They don't solve anything.
Aaron, why not?
Because the government is not a competitive organization. It takes from one group and gives to another.
So, Aaron, you're saying that health insurance should be competitive?
It should be 100% competitive.
Why?
Absolutely.
Why?
It should be a free market.
Why?
Free market like everything else.
Why?
Just like education.
Why?
Yeah, the government is not the answer. They never have been.
Aaron, why?
No government has survived the history of the world.
You don't.
The U.S. is going to survive?
Aaron, it's a very simple thing. You know, the purpose of the government, read your Constitution, was to promote the general welfare of the United States. There are some things that are part of the commons. They do serve the public good. Education and healthcare are two of those things, and those are areas where, when you look at every other developed country in the world, the only exception is the United States. We're the village idiots filled with people like Aaron. And every other country in the world has said, no, we're going to not only provide free education to everybody. Denmark pays students $200 a month to go to school, to go to college. We're not only going to provide national health care for everybody, but we're going to provide it with no deductibles whatsoever. That's the case in every other developed country in the world. And what do they get out of that? What do the people get out of that? What does Aaron get out of that? Lower costs, better education, an explosion. I mean, we saw this in the United States here, and after the World War II, when my dad came back from Japan on the GI Bill, went to college for 2 years, the GI Bill, for every $1 we spent on the GI Bill, sending young men to college for free, for every $1 we spent, by 1965, we had returned $7 in extra tax income to the federal government as a result of those people earning higher salaries than they would have made if they didn't have a college education. Education is an investment. Healthcare is an investment. If you have a healthy populace, we have maternal death rates, mothers dying in the United States at rates that are comparable to African countries. And I'm not talking the top of the line African countries. We have the highest maternal death rate in the developed world in the United States because we don't have a national health care system. Charlene Dill is an example of that. What don't you get about if everybody's healthy and if everybody's educated, it's better for the country?
Because people have to take personal responsibility. And people in this country can't.
Aaron, you have never taken personal responsibility. You didn't birth yourself. You didn't raise yourself. You didn't educate yourself. Personal responsibility. Don't give me this crap.
I have to get up. Every day I have to get up and deal with myself, and I never ask the government for shit. They just take it from me.
Yeah, Aaron, you can't use that word on the air, so I've got to beep you out. But you never ask the government for. Oh, geez. I don't know how to get through. I don't. It just seems so obvious. Francis in Palm Springs, California, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Francis, what's up?
Good morning.
Hey, Francis,
Good morning,
let me put you back on hold. I only have 15 seconds, and it wouldn't be fair to you. Let me put you back on hold here. I just looked up at the clock, and it's going to bite me in 15 seconds. Let me just recap real quickly and real cleanly. It is entirely appropriate that we have a private sector. And I don't want the government making my blue jeans. I don't want the government making my computer. I don't want the government making my car. But there are certain things that all of our fate hangs based on that have to do with the public good. Water, septic, electric, healthcare, education. These are the appropriate areas where, in fact, government does a better job than private industry.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And the experience of every developed country in the world, with the exception of the United States, proves it. Well, actually, the United States proves it. As I said, look at the GI Bill.
Our Thom Hartmann University book review of the day is Richard Belzer's new book, Corporate Conspiracies, How Wall Street Took Over Washington. This is from the introduction. Of all the books we researched for this work, the title we loved the most was this one, Regime Change Begins at Home, Freeing America from Corporate Rule. We loved it because it presents as a hard fact something that very few people completely understand. And then he quotes from that book. Since 1980, America has been run by a corporate regime that has co-opted both political parties and shifted sovereignty from we the people to transnational corporations, end of quote. Since this book covers some corporate conspiracies, we will no doubt take a lot of heat for that and be deridingly referred to as conspiracy theorists. So we would just like to remind people that the phrase conspiracy theorist was actually invented by the Central Intelligence Agency, to be used as a weaponized term with which to discourage people from seeking the truth. We kid you not. CIA document 1035-960, dated April 1, 1967, regarding the agency's concern about the reputation of the American government, in quotes. That document also suggested various tactics for countering, quote, conspiratorial arguments, which confronted the gaping holes critics observed in the findings of the Warren Commission, which investigated, in quotes, they really did no such thing in reality, the assassination of President Kennedy. Quote, the agency also directed its members to employ propaganda assets to negate and refute the attacks of the critics, end quote. So as you can see, and as the Freedom of Information Act release of that CIA document clearly reveals, the use of the term conspiracy theorist is actually a conspiracy itself. But if you believe rightly that Julius Caesar and hundreds of other leaders were the victims of conspirators, as they were, then you're an evil conspiracy theorist, right? Well, if anybody actually believes that, then you better read up on your history, boys and girls, because conspiracies are an ongoing and very common occurrence in human conduct. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Are you aware that many friends of Robin Williams believe that his suicide was the direct result of the prescription drugs he was taking, and that over 23,000 suicides are attributed to psychiatric drugs each year in the United States? Did you know that turning prisons into a big business has resulted in the United States having the highest incarceration rate in the history of the world, and that most are just drug crimes? Are you aware that the historic event of the toppling of the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq was actually a U.S. military PSYOPs, psychological operations warfare, program, a completely orchestrated event with the knowledge and assistance of U.S. media, and not a spontaneous event as it was portrayed by our media? Did you know that the Pentagon is sending $1.5 trillion of our tax dollars to their corporate buddies for a new fighter jet that's already superfluous? Are you aware that continuing to rely on oil instead of investing in low-carbon energy solutions will cost us $44 trillion due to climate change? Did you know that companies like General Motors at times know that their products will kill people, but they do nothing because it's actually cheaper to compensate the victims than it is to correct the problem? Then read and learn on, friends. American corporations have been getting away with murder, literally, for many, many years. Just take a good look at their history. The above example of GM is a proven point. Corporate consumer advocate Clarence Ditlow, executive director of the nonprofit Center for Automotive Safety, bitterly criticized the settlement. Quote, GM killed over 100 people by knowingly putting a defective ignition switch into over 1 million vehicles, Ditlow said. Today, thanks to its lobbyists, GM officials walk off scot-free while its customers are 6 feet under. Tobacco companies knowingly lied about the harmful effects of cigarettes for decades, even though there was plenty of known medical proof of their damage. They even knowingly hid that information from the public. Oil, gas, and chemical companies have been knowingly polluting our planet with cancer-causing chemicals and products also for decades, and they know that they're doing it. Pharmaceutical companies have lied and attempted to minimize news coverage regarding the deaths that they know the drugs will cause. That's murder, plain and simple. Maybe you can paint a public relations damage control over that landscape if you happen to have all their tons of money and paid political influence, but it's still murder. Look at the parents of one of their victims straight in the eye and try and tell them it's not murder. Do you honestly think they'll listen to you? This book is an effort to reveal the insanity of corporate greed once and for all. At this point, most people probably care more about their local football team than they do about the workings of our democratic republic. And while we understand their frustration and their reasons, that's not good enough, folks. We have to all get involved to stop these bastards from getting away with what they've been getting away with for far too long. They're robbing us blind, poisoning our planet, hijacking our democracy, and ruining the futures of our children and grandchildren. They must be stopped. As an agent of the U.S. government employed to implement policies to benefit U.S. corporations, John Perkins noted in his classic work, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that corporate America has extended its rule beyond our borders. Quoting from Perkins, what we had previously considered U.S. corporations were now truly international, even from a legal standpoint. Many of them were incorporated in a multitude of countries. They could pick and choose from an assortment of rules and regulations under which to conduct their activities, And the multitude of globalizing trade agreements and organizations made this even easier. Corporatocracy had become a fact, and it increasingly exerted itself as the single major influence on world economics and politics. Sad to make this observation, but we have become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Today is the anniversary of the birth of James Baldwin. It's also one of my kids' birthdays. James Baldwin, the remarkable, one of the best writers of the 20th century. I mean, just bottom line. And here's a quote from James Baldwin to celebrate the day. "The police in this country make no distinction between a Black Panther or a black lawyer or my brother or me. Cops aren't going to ask me my name before they pull the trigger. I'm part of this society, and I'm in exactly the same situation as anybody else, any other black person in it. If I don't know that, then I'm fairly self-deluded. What I'm trying to get at is the question of responsibility. I didn't drop the bomb that killed 4 black schoolgirls in Birmingham, and I never lynched anybody. Yet I am responsible not for what has happened, but for what can happen." Brilliant. James Baldwin is just an amazing, amazing man. Bill in Princeton, Indiana. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Okay, Tom, I got one thing to tell you. I got a couple of other items, but
pick one.
Guy you pardon?
Pick one, please. One topic.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Just fine, Bill. What's your topic?
I can't understand you.
Okay. Bill, you're going to have to check back with us. I'm sorry that it doesn't seem to be working out. Carol in Twin Cities, Minnesota. Hey, Carol, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Quickly, I love the Muse.
Great.
On the whole thing about voter ID and voter registration. I don't know about other people where they live, but when I registered to vote, I had to prove who I was, and then my name was added to the voter rolls. Mm-hmm. If I move or if I go to another state, I have to register wherever I am. So I proved who I was one time. Why should I have to prove who I am every single time I vote?
Damn good question. The answer, the simple answer is to discourage you from voting. I mean, that's what's actually going on. And, there's a very specific reason for that. The Republicans, the conservatives, know that, their largely white, largely suburban base is always going to turn out to vote. And the what do you call it? The older people, young people, college students, people of color, marginalized communities, people who are working like Charlene Dill was at several part-time jobs, trying to scrape together income. All of those people are less likely to vote as regularly as stable white people in the suburbs. And thus you have, and Sean, I'm going to play this out of my computer. Thus you have people like Paul Weyrich coming out and saying to a group of, to an auditorium full of Christian Republican activists in 1980 in Dallas, Texas, as he was working on the Reagan campaign, he says this, which has become the marching orders for the entire party for all of the, 40 years, 50 years since then.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome, good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
So there you go. Did I answer your question?
Well, not exactly, because if I am registered one time, everybody should know that. I mean, I have to think these people don't realize you don't register every time you vote. You register one time. You vote multiple times on that registration as long as you live in the same place.
Yeah, well, that's the theory. Carol, you're appealing to logic, and I'm telling you, these guys have a different logic. Their logic is that they want as few people voting as possible so that the most reliable voters will represent will be the ones who are selecting the politicians, because those most reliable voters in their mind are these basically suburban white people. Carol, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's a great question. Eddie in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Eddie, you wanted to talk about Portugal?
Yeah, I do, Tom, and thanks for taking my call. I've been doing a lot of research. They have a golden visa program, and a few of the things that I just wanted to kind of let maybe some of your listeners know that, they're like third or fourth safest country in the world. They
Portugal?
have very limited crime because, yes,
Okay.
Portugal is. And, obviously no weapons, no guns. They're 12th ranked in healthcare in the world.
They have a single payer healthcare system in Portugal. You have free education in Portugal.
Absolutely, they do, and they have so many benefits. And so I was listening to the previous caller about not wanting to have health care for people and education for people, and I beg to differ that there's such a big benefit for all of that for all of us. It's sad that some people in our country just see things this way. And,
if I can insert a comment in here, Eddie, and speaking to the guy who called and said that he didn't think that healthcare and education were proper functions of government. I have worked in countries where the government provides neither healthcare nor education. I've worked in South Sudan. I worked in Uganda during the war with Idi Amin. I've worked in at least one Southeast Asian country. I can't say for sure that they don't provide education, though. If he wants to turn the United States into South Sudan, I don't want to live here, and I don't think most Americans would want to live here. A country that doesn't educate its people and doesn't keep its people healthy ceases to be functionally a country. It becomes chaos. Back to you, Eddie.
Tom, I grew up on welfare and had all of those benefits through the 60s and 70s. And, I've been very fortunate to be successful in my life. And I'm thankful. And it's sad that I have to take into consideration to move to another country to feel safe.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate in this day and time that with a $22 trillion economy, we really can't afford to take care of our own. And people don't see the individuals on the street corner begging for money and needing health care, mental health care of some kind, and that we're out there allowing 3D guns to be printed. It's just disappointing.
Yeah, our priorities are rather skewed.
Yeah. They really are. They really are.
So what was this golden visa program, Eddie, in Portugal?
If you invest X amount of dollars in Portugal, within 6 years, you can write for citizenship and get dual citizenship in Portugal, which would give you citizenship throughout Europe.
Wow.
So
interesting.
you would get a dual citizen program. And so you would be eligible for all their health care programs, everything, by going there to retire. And one of the perks are you get 10 years tax-free pension retirement, so no taxes on any of your pensions.
So it's like Social Security was before Reagan reformed it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Social Security used to be tax-free.
Tax-free, and if you have a pension, you get that tax-free. If you have a 401k, anything that you have, you get obviously tax-free for 10 years.
Yeah.
So
remarkable.
You're paying for their economy so that they can actually recontribute to their own people and eliminate that austerity program so that they can start giving back their own people their own benefits.
Yeah.
By allowing people to come into their country and retire there tax-free. So you're benefiting their economy.
Yeah, great story. Eddie, I got to run, but thank you for the call. A lot of good information there. Pete in Tyler, Texas. Hey, Pete, what's up?
Real quick, Tom, my sister has a name for people like Aaron. She calls them logic tight. You can be airtight, you can be watertight, you can be logic tight. There's no way you get any logic into this guy.
Yeah. Well, this is the belief system that the billionaires have promoted through promoting Ayn Rand and promoting these memes, and they sound so nice. I mean, when I was in my early 20s, I thought libertarian. Oh, that sounds great. I had Harry Brown's bumper sticker on my filing cabinet in my office. I owned a business. I thought, hey, this is the way to do it. And I look back on that and say, I was such a sucker. It was just, this idea that if we all just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, where there's no such thing as a society. Society is actually a collection of individuals. You know, it sounds good. It doesn't work. If you like that, go live in South Sudan.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks. I appreciate the call. Francis in Palm Springs, California. Whoops. Hang on just a second, Francis. There we go. Hit the magic button.
All right. Good morning, Tom. A long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you, Francis.
I appreciate your commentary every day. I have a question out for everybody, and I will hang up and let you answer this. Where's our moral voices of today? The one who could motivate people to understand this is not what is morally right going on in our country. Another thing that relates to that is, what is the difference between the Middle East individual going into the mosque and listening to Western hatred to be spewed from the mosques compared to the right-wingers going into churches in the South and spewing hate towards everybody, or telling people to listen to Donald Trump? I have one example. I was in a church here in Palm Desert about a month and a half ago, and it was just at the height of what was happening at the border. And the pastor said, well, you know, there's some things that I don't like about what our president done, but one thing he's going to do is put prayer back into the school. And I was so outraged, and I emailed him. He hasn't emailed me back because I really read him the riot act on where's your moral compass?
Right.
And I'll let you answer, Tom.
Well, the founders were very explicit that they did not want religion in government, and they didn't want government in religion. And in fact, this was the debate between Jefferson and Madison, was which is worse, you know, a priest running the country or the country subsidizing the churches. Well, it came to a head with James Madison's presidency when Congress passed a law. Up until that point in time, Congress had been directly funding the poorhouses in Washington, D.C. Congress paid for them. And Congress passed a law saying that the poorhouses could be run by the churches and that Congress would give the money to the churches. And this was obviously something that the churches wanted to get in on. And James Madison vetoed that. It was the first veto of his presidency. And he said, this will establish a precedent. He called it an agency, but the word now would be precedent. This will establish a precedent that government should subsidize religion, which is antithetical to the thought processes of the founders, of the people who put this country together. And in fact, you should read his veto message. It's brilliant. What that pastor did was reveal a profound ignorance about the history of the United States, the system of government that we have, and also what happens to countries when they become theocracies. I mean, if he wants to live in a theocracy, move to Saudi Arabia. You know, it's not even close to what we've imagined America to be. So that's my rant. Does that make sense, Francis?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thanks a lot for the call.
Good work.
Yep, thank you. Good to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's coming up. It's going to hit 47 past the hour in about 2 seconds. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around. It's 47 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Pam in Smyrna, Georgia. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Tom?
Yes. Hi, Pam.
Okay. Listen, what I want, there's so much talk about pardon. Mm-hmm. Everything gets confusing. And what I want to know is if, say, Don Jr. was put on trial, could the president pardon him before he is even found guilty? Or
yes,
I mean,
the president can do that. In fact, Jerry Ford pardoned a bunch of people in the Nixon administration, and George Herbert Walker Bush pardoned a bunch of people from the Reagan administration who had not yet gone to trial for crimes.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, that's I
okay.
I need to ask about
well,
that.
Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, Pam, but the presidential pardon power is absolute with two exceptions. Number one, a president cannot pardon anything that has to do with an impeachment. And number two, the president cannot pardon for crimes committed against states or cities, only against federal laws. So, if somebody broke a federal law, and there's a lot of overlap between federal laws and state laws, where it's being prosecuted under federal law, the president can definitely pardon them. And I think that's when Trump pardoned Scooter Libby, he was telegraphing to Michael Cohen and to Paul Manafort, you guys just hang on, I'll take care of you on the back end.
Right, that's what I was going to say. Is that why Paul Manafort is hanging back and not cooperating?
I believe it is. I absolutely believe it is. Pam, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Great question. Let's see here. Jim in East Central Minnesota. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to call you about something about Social Security and Medicare. I used to be a union representative for our teachers union, and we were able to get retiree health insurance. And we get it until we are eligible for Medicare, Social Security.
Right.
Well, I was talking to my financial advisor that we used to have when I was working, and he's still my financial person. And I got to talking about Social Security and about delaying it or not, or of course, my wife is going to be eligible in less than a year. And we got to talking about it, and I mentioned about Paul Ryan and the 2% tax cuts he was doing, the slow bleeding. Did I understand?
Yep.
And he didn't know anything about it, so I said, well, Google Paul Ryan tax cuts to Social Security. He said, Jim, I can't find anything on it. So I was wondering, how can someone look that up and verify that?
Well, the New York Times reported on it. It was part of the Republican tax bill and this $1.5 trillion bill, and I believe, actually, it might have been a piece of legislation that same week, but it was passed right around that time. And what it did was they didn't cut back on Social Security benefits yet. What they cut back on was the funding for people who work at the Social Security Administration. And they did the same thing with Medicare. And so, in fact, the two are kind of the same because Social Security runs Medicare. So now, and by the way, this is like the fifth or sixth time the Republicans have done this in the last decade and a half. They keep trying to make Medicare and Social Security more unwieldy and less pleasant to interact with. So now if you call Social Security, you may have to wait on hold for an hour and a half because, thousands of people who were there to help out have been laid off. So that's what's going on, Jim. When the time comes for them to actually cut Medicare and Social Security, they'll do it under the rubric of reforming the programs. What you may be thinking of, Jim, is Barack Obama suspended 2% of the Social Security and Medicare tax. He suspended 2% of that for a year to help stimulate the economy. That might be what you're thinking of. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. Welcome back. Excuse me. Thom Hartmann here with you, and David in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, Tom. So I mentioned to your the person that puts me on, the producer.
Call screener.
I'm a libertarian, but you know, I have two very important exceptions, I think, to my libertarianism. One being environmentalism, because I think harming the environment actually goes against the libertarian non-aggression principle, and the other being Medicare or health care in a country. And really the reason why I disagree with my fellow libertarians on that is because, you know, libertarians really like the invisible hand and market. And unfortunately, in the healthcare industry, the invisible hand doesn't work. You can't just opt out and say, well, I'm just not going to buy this product, because, you know, if you do, you die.
Right.
So,
and it's become so complex that it's very difficult for anybody to do comparison shopping. It just gets hopelessly confusing.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I mean, even if we simplified the market, you know, if we tried to simplify the market, it quite simply can't be governed by the invisible hand.
Right.
And so we need the common power of the government to negotiate for us, to say, okay, we need the small.
Here's the other problem with the invisible hand. Say you take your hand and put it into a box. It's invisible to everybody, right? And it's doing something. But what is it going to come up against? It's going to come up against the edges of the box. The invisible hand is simply, I mean, you know, it's Adam Smith. It's from Wealth of Nations. And actually, he was warning about the invisible hand. If you look at the actual quote, he was saying that this is why people prefer domestically produced products as opposed to imported products. But in any case, if you're relying on the marketplace to make decisions for all of us, what you're going to find is that the rules of the marketplace define the parameters. Those are the box. And so if the rules of the marketplace say, as libertarian ideology does, that humans have primacy over all other forms of life and everything else on Earth, you know, that's fine when you're just, you know, raping the wilderness in 1800 and killing Indians for Lebensraum, you know, for living room. But it's not fine when you are on the edge of taking your planet down. And so I think
absolutely, yeah, that's the non-aggression principle I was talking about. You're harming people further down to make profit for yourself, and that's why I think it absolutely violates the non-aggression principle when you're harming the environment.
Yeah, I'm with you, David, and thank you for the call. Thank you for a sensible libertarian perspective. They're uncommon, and I appreciate it. Judy in Lombard, Illinois. Hey, Judy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was just wondering, the other day at the end of my driveway was a newspaper, and it was called the Epoch Daily. It's EPOCH.
Right.
And it was a conservative newspaper. Never in my life did I see it before. It praised Trump, and the guy who it's put out by some fellow who's a Chinese businessman. But, I mean, I wondered if anyone else had ever gotten one.
Oh, I'm sure of it. It was a free newspaper?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think
they have those in Washington, D.C. They pay people to pass them out at the subways, these right-wing newspapers.
Really?
Yeah, they literally, everywhere you go, there's two of them. There's two competing right-wing newspapers in Washington, D.C.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
well,
they're funded by right-wing billionaires.
Right. I want you to know that I watch your show all the time, and I have a little thing here. You'll know who it is. When the speech condemns free press, you are hearing the words of a tyrant, and that's what people need to listen to.
Who's the quote from?
Thomas Jefferson.
Wow. Thank you very much for that, Judy.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Yep,
Bye.
appreciate it. The words of a tyrant. I'm going to have to look that quote up. Louise, help me remember. That's a good one. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. What a fascinating day. We'll be back tomorrow. It'll be Anything Goes Friday, although it is kind of Anything Goes summer. And, continuing with the news of the day and keeping a rather jaundiced eye on what the administration is up to. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, T-H-O-M, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.